fascinating events that are taking place in the world of archaeology, cosmology. Everything that's going on now has been recorded in the ancient past. And unearthing the lost world of the Cloud Eaters. Let me explain something. Cloud Eaters was the name given to us by Cliff Mahudi, who's a Zuni elder. When I asked him point blank, what do you call the giants? Now, in the Special Forces community, they call them long walkers. But Cloud Eaters simply means if you're like a 6-foot guy looking up at an 18-foot giant, you're going to see literally on a cloudy day, it's going to look like his head is in the cloud. And why they call them eaters is because, what we're going to talk about tonight is the fact that cannibalism has come full forward now, full circle, with even some of the lead scientists saying it's a good way to increase the protein source on Earth. I think they're probably having dinner on, human remains or something, because, and I'm not kidding, what is intrinsic and important, and I guess the better word would be inherent in our discussion tonight, is when Tom first broke on the show, Doug, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago, the gates of hell being opened, the idea was that literally a gate held something back or allowed something through. So the events that are taking place now, everything that's disgusting, everything that's perverted, everything that is absolutely like the times of old are coming back into our knowledge. And it's critical that people understand that the evidence, the incursion of giants in history is undeniable. The references in ancient writings are undeniable. The standards of which courts base evidence and base findings is undeniable. It was Orwell that said they who control the past basically determine the future. The reason why this is so critical at this time in venture in our, let's just say this, progression downward, is because Jesus specifically said in the days, the last days, if the days weren't shortened for the elect's sake, the elect are those who believe in him, that there'd be no flesh left alive. And it's funny now that even as people will argue with that, the biggest theme and meme now coming out of Hollywood and even on television, or rightly named Devil Vision, is the idea of cannibalism. So when Tom and I put this book together, The Lost World of the Cloud Eaters, I pretty much dealt with the civilization of angels. A lot of people have a misunderstanding of angels. A lot of people have a hard time to reference angels. The idea that we're dealing with pre-flood or antediluvian and a pre-judgment period that some people call pre-Adam, some people call prior chaos. The point is that what we've done in this book, all 505 pages, is take it from the beginning of the beginning. Now, Genesis, it talks about the world being in a state of chaos without form and void, and those words are tohu and bohu. But in the book of Isaiah, it said that God did not create the earth void. So where is this dichotomy? Is this a contradiction? Not at all. Because the angelic civilizations that even the Sumerian Table of Kings goes back almost 250,000 years, there's a difference in the size and reign of the kings. Some of these guys reigned 36,000 years, and everybody tries to put it into the understanding that, this is a misplaced decimal system, et cetera, et cetera. But what most scholars will not deal with or touch is that in all the different Babylonian, Assyrian, Assyro-Babylonian, and all the myths, legends that came forth after the plains of Shinar and Nimrod's attempt to build a tower, who reached into heaven, which was nothing more than a gate. Before Genesis, the book of Genesis speaks specifically that God divided the continents, if you will, in the days of Peleg. All of these things are focusing on what we're going to talk about and what we deal with in our book. The catastrophic nature of what happened to the planet Rahab. I think what most people are going to get from this book, Doug, is the fact that from the beginning to the end, Jesus told us what it was going to be like. There are ancillary accounts, but the New Testament and the Old Testament and the New Testament refers to this time period that they're very concise in what's going on. You cannot escape that there's a war going on. We see wars on earth as a reflection of wars in heaven. We see obviously the serpent which stood erect in the Garden of Eden until God cursed it to crawl on its belly is even the name of the United States, if you will, the Americas, Amaruka, land of the plumed serpent. When Tom and I were in the desert Southwest, they described the entities that came through the gates that they currently open today. And for the record, if everybody wants to see, and look, it's not like the Stargate series, but a photographer friend of mine who was down the Grand Canyon, interestingly enough, a couple weeks ago, took the picture of a 13-foot tall, hollowed out, not a cave, but almost like a, if you will, a pear shape, not a pear shape, but I guess you'd say almost an oblong indentation or added in the side with a piece of wood stump there that evidently somebody goes to communicate with spirits. So where this leads and where this started, literally we've been all over the desert Southwest. Tom and I are mutual film teams, film crews. We've joined together our talents, and while we've been on parallel tracks for pretty close to 20 years, it seems like the Lord in His mercy is bringing this stuff together. Now, people ask me, why do you guys focus on this? Why don't you deal with just winning souls? Why don't you deal with this, that, and the other thing? You know, the reason we do what we do is because we're both called to do it. Jesus said, men's hearts failing them for looking for fear, for looking after those things coming upon the earth. People get upset when you talk about the days of Noah. They said, well, there's just violence. We're talking about violence that is carried down genetically. And even, I think a couple days ago, Doug, I don't know if you saw it, and Tom, maybe you saw it, but they've proven that nematode worms even have 14 generations of memory. So what we're finding is that we're now seeing, if you will, not only the gates of hell opening up, but the time that Daniel was told that knowledge would increase and run to and fro. We're seeing now the revelation. We're seeing God unveiling that which has been hidden for thousands of years, in which the occult and the Egyptian priesthood, by the Egyptian priesthood, I'm talking about the keepers of the secrets. All of these things we're dealing with bring together or brought us together in the desert Southwest, as well as the islands of Sardinia, the islands of Malta, the islands all through the Aegean, even into North America, which again is called Amaruka, the land of the plumed serpent. So this is probably the most complete and concise pre-flood and post-flood presentation of why myths, legends, and all of even the church fathers referred to this time period, and why it's critical for everyone to understand, because there's going to be a compelling series of events that's coming on the scene, and it's going to cause people to doubt their faith, to doubt the Word of God, and an entire contra-Genesis position is going to be put forth for people to believe in all the artifacts which the secret societies and the power brokers deal with on the black market and draw occult powers from. That's their words, not mine. They're going to be brought forth, and they're going to lay out a compelling series of artifacts, evidence, and new findings, just like what's going on in the Antarctic. And by the way, you know when you've got all the heads of the intelligence agencies, the primary intelligence agencies, meeting in New Zealand, and they could basically go someplace in the mountains of Colorado, you've got to ask yourself why. So with no further ado, I'll turn it over to Tom, and we're really excited, ladies and gentlemen. The Lost World of the Cloud Eaters, we'll deal with the other issues that we're going to be talking about, but right now we're going to focus on the book for this first hour, and then the second hour we'll focus on the DVD/the book, and then the third hour we'll tell people why the conference in Branson, Missouri in September is unlike any other conference. It's because our focus is singular and is bringing together, in my opinion, some of the most detailed researchers and well-written and well-placed research that's ever been undertaken. And it's like, in my opinion, God has raised up these men who will be in Branson for such a time as this. Go ahead, Tom. Welcome.
Hey, so good to be on the radio again with Doug and Joe and Steve Quayle, and thanks for having me on the program with you. Yeah, I mean, without doubt, this is the biggest thing we've ever done. And, you know, a lot of people think, Steve, that you and I have written numerous books together. And actually, we never have published a book together. This is the very first time we've ever done it. And it really was just a series of events from, you know, a former spokesperson for the Smithsonian and a 20-year museum curator by the name of Michael Herring, me just having almost an accidental meeting with him, and then, you know, you and me and him corresponding between the three of us, and the doors that he opened for us to meet with the tribal elders. By the way, these are the leaders of the tribes, not Johnny-come-latelys. These are absolutely the governors of the nations, which among the Hopi, the Zuni, this just does not happen. They're very suspicious of white people. So for us to get the opportunity, and then the stuff that they revealed, which we'll get into some of this tonight, but I mean, it was so amazing, so groundbreaking. I mean, you know, one of the first things for me, Steve, that was eye-opening was how we learned from Michael Herring and then from the tribal elders that we met secretly with for a week this last year, how there are secret societies among the tribes. You mentioned secret societies a moment ago, and you and me both would mostly mean by that things like the Freemasons and whatever. I did not know that there are secret societies among the Indian tribes, and when Michael Herring first brought that up, and he said, yeah, think of it as an Illuminati among the Native American nations, compare it to the Freemasons. And then, when we started learning about it, we learned through him and the tribal leaders that one of the secret societies is called the Giants Society, and these are the people, some of whom were at that table with us, including medicine men, that, well, they claim to communicate with and bring up the spirits of the giants. One of the men that was with us there that day, his wife talked that very day about bringing up one of the giants and visiting with it. Some spooky stuff, right? But they also claim that they protect the giant remains, the skeletons, the bones, the technology that belong to them, including the ancient Stargate, which they roughly described to us where it's at, and I'm hoping we're going to have a follow-up excursion to that location. Angelic technology, basically, in a secret place that was roughly described to us, and that I'm not going to go into, but I do think you go into it in the documentary film, part of your documentary. And then, of course, the book, Unearthing the Lost World of the Cloud Eaters, which is 505 pages, as you say, and you wrote 250 pages. The whole, for the listener out there, when you get this book, the whole first section is dealing with pre-flood, even pre-Adamic creation, technology of the angelic world. And so Steve does 250 pages of fascinating research, and then I pick it up from there and talk about from Genesis 6 and forward, as well as what we learned here among the Pueblo tribes in the Four Corners area of the United States this last year, and then compare that to what we know from biblical chronology and history. And anyway, what a gigantic project. And it wasn't just me and Steve Quayle. For the listener, you should know that Steve had an entire team of investigators. I had an entire team of investigators. We're talking about carloads of people flying in with helicopters into the Four Corners area of the United States, spending a week with the tribal elders. It's such a gigantic project. But we also literally did uncover previously undisclosed and unpublished information about the lost world of the Cloud Eaters, and that's what the documentary film and the book reveals. In fact, it's such a big project that Steve decided that we literally have to have a conference in September, and later on Steve will tell you about that. Anselm P. Rambla, L.A. Marzulli, Timothy Alberino, Dr. Michael Lick, Dr. Langford, Derek Gilbert, all these people going to be in Branson, Missouri. And when Steve gives you the information about that, you're going to want to check into it really quickly, because Gordon MacDonald, who used to organize the Strategic Perspectives Conference for Chuck Misler, my friend, After Chuck Misler retired, Gordon left that organization, and he's now working for Steve Quayle on this project. And he's been telling us that the sales are more than brisk. In fact, we know that with this being the very first radio show that we've done mentioning this conference, nothing else, just a couple of Facebook posts and things like that, it's already half sold out. And the venue, which is the mansion, the beautiful Mansion Theater in Branson, Missouri, can hold 3,000 people, and we know it's going to completely sell out before the event. So this is going to be something that you're not going to want to miss. And we're talking right now with Jim Baker about maybe also co-sponsoring that and having some programs filmed on the Jim Baker Show so that people who are at this conference can go the day after over to Morningside and be part of the live audience over there. So anyway, giant, humongous project, but I couldn't be more excited. I mean, Steve, I could have hardly imagined this last year when I here packed up my off-road vehicle and we ventured into the four-corner area of the United States, how much that trip was going to pay off, or the doors that were going to be open and the unanswered questions that were going to be raised. But the bottom line is, when all was said and done, my crew, your crew, we got answers that is going to demand that the history of America be rewritten. I mean, you won't be able to face this evidence and still believe that America at one time, before Christopher Columbus landing at San Salvador Island in 1492, that America had been hermeneutically sealed off from the rest of the world. You're going to learn that that absolutely is untrue. There is a significant evidence, both pictorial, textual, and otherwise, to the contrary, diffusionism that does already and is going to confront scientific orthodoxy. And as a matter of fact, we may even get to sit down with the Smithsonian that's interested in some of this information. The bottom line is there's archaeological sites, artifacts, photographic evidence, all of it that suggests several things. Number one, that numerous pre-Columbian seafarers traversed the Atlantic Ocean and interacted with early Native Americans. Number two, that architecture here in the United States compares to pre-flood megalithic structures worldwide and testifies of a time when angels ruled on earth. And then thirdly, that the giant offspring of these watchers were cannibalistic dragon worshippers that spread across the earth like a locust plague, desecrating everything in their path, including winding up here in what we today call the United States of America. And that is not just our opinion. What you'll find in the book Unearthing the Lost World of the Cloud Eaters is how we met with indigenous leaders from several of the Pueblo tribes and how they preserve in their oldest stories we would call them legends, but they correspond with biblical chronology, including this sudden violent incursion by giants worldwide, which of course was central to our research. For example, the Apache told me of the legend that they have. It goes back to their earliest history of these Indians. They called them the Tartums, but they once lived. They were peaceful farmers. They were in the area of Mount Graham, actually, in Arizona, which we covered a lot of that in some of the works I did with Chris Putnam. And by the way, if there are people listening to this program that don't know this, Chris Putnam passed away at 51 years of age just a couple of months ago. And so Chris is gone, but he leaves behind the research and work that he produced that we believe will continue to minister to people for a long time. Him and I went to Mount Graham. That's why I raised his name. But they tell this story of the Indians that lived in that area and how all of a sudden, at the same time, by the way, that Moses on the other side of the world is writing in the Pentateuch, there were giants on the earth in those days. Here in the Americas, these what they call the Jindupids. They describe these things as Goliaths. They're so big they use tree limbs for toothpicks, and they're led by this massive humanoid type thing called Evilkin, who allegedly came from the area around the Gulf of Baja. But those giants were wiping out the Tartans. So they ran, they hide themselves on the ground in the mountains. They cry out to the great Creator God, and He sends a flood that covers the earth. And their story around this matches narrative. So a minute ago, Steve, when you said some people ask why we talk about this kind of stuff, it's because it supports Scripture. It collaborates, if you will, that these global events that are talked about in the Bible are not myth. They did happen, and people in cultures around the world in their own way recorded those events as happening right when the Bible says that they did, including the fact that the flood was sent because giant marauders were terrorizing and cannibalizing people around the world. And so some of the way the American Indians tell the story is it's translated according to their world view, and so we would think of those parts of it as mythological, but for the most part, it's remarkably thematic, if you will, coherent with the Bible's book of Genesis, chapter 6. The Apache creation myth is interesting in another regard as well, which we learned about, in that a particular version of it talks about the one who lives above, who descends down over the mountain in a flying disc at the start of creation, in the beginning, when nothing existed. And this Creator, riding upon this heavenly disc, as they describe it, sounds literally like it's taken out of the Bible, where it describes God in the same kind of language. There's a dragon with the power of speech who beguiles mankind, teaching them to use their kivas, their underground rooms where their prayers and rituals were made, to practice witchcraft and sorcery, what the Bible calls pharmakia, the effort to use mind-expanding drugs to put yourself in contact with those who are on the other side of the gateway, and how this played a role in the opening of supernatural gateways in pre-Columbian American history, through which the giants came and terrorized the early Americans. So now Michael Herring, who I mentioned briefly a moment ago, he was an American Indian Museum curator for over 20 years, and that's how he was also, when he was also an indigenous art PhD for the Smithsonian, and gave lectures at the Smithsonian for many, many years on that subject matter. And he's probably listening to this program tonight, and if he is, hi, Mike, and kiss your beautiful wife for us. But through him, we were able to get a private, week-long secret meeting toward the end of last year with the leaders of the nation. And the one you mentioned a moment ago, Mahudi, again, no Johnny-come-lately. He was the head of tribal affairs to the United States government for decades. And he's in your documentary film talking about things. In fact, I thought it was funny because part of when you're filming him, the other native tribal leaders are sitting there and their eyes are wide because he's giving up secret, private information that's not supposed to be shared outside of the tribe. And he looks right at the camera and says, I'm old enough. I've been around long enough. What are they going to do? Kill me? I'm just going to talk about this stuff. And some of the stuff he gives up is unbelievable, which I'm not going to talk about because I don't want to ruin the content of the documentary film. So I'm only going to hint at that and what's in the book and so on about the Cloud Eaters and what has until now been very highly guarded Native American information regarding locations, stargates, the bones of giants, and so on. So anyway, Steve, what a blast, man. I mean, how crazy is it that all of these doors opened up in a short period of time? And I drove into the Valley of the Gods while you and Timothy and your team are flying in on a gigantic helicopter. And we got some great footage of that event.
Well, I think that what's important for people to understand, we have to cover and had to cover a vast amount of space to basically trace the total, if you will, migration and what caused the migration of the Anasazi. Now, I want to share something too. When we were talking about all this stuff, the the question that kept coming up, Tom would look at me across the big table we're all seated at and probably see me ready to jump out of my skin, because what was interesting to me is with the history that the Native Americans possess of the giants eating their people, they still venerate them. And they told us, and this is something that people need to understand, that now, in contemporary time, this isn't old stuff. The giant societies get together at periodic times and open the gates, and the giants tell them they're coming back. Now, why they can't come through yet, I don't know. It's probably to do with God's timing. But what we were able to do is basically place and put together a thread of history that, quite candidly, the official narrative has always tried to avoid. There are specific proteins found in the scat of animals and humans that indicate that cannibalism, when you eat human flesh, only specific proteins can be tagged, identified, and analyzed that would be indicative to flesh eaters. Now, here's what's interesting. Most people have got to understand this. We're talking about the gates of hell opening, and both the Phoenicians and the Carthaginians practice ritual sacrifice of children and pretty much infants. Now, this wasn't infanticide. This was absolutely a ritualistic slaughter of children. And what we're seeing in some of the leaks from WikiLeaks, and Doug, you'll find this interesting, the very same appetite for the blood of children is now present in the headlines of today. It doesn't matter if mainstream media will cover or not. As I've declared since I've been on talk radio, some people get offended, but mainstream media is nothing more than vomit brokers, and nobody wants to hang around vomit. As a matter of fact, it stinketh. So when we're talking about human sacrifice, when we're talking about the desert Southwest, when we're talking about and go to the areas of Sardinia and Malta, and the Sardinians is called the Island of Giants. Now, let me explain something. One of the criticisms that's always leveled, where are these bones of giants? I just want to have one picture. There are 149 million non-documented, out-of-place artifacts that don't fit the historic narrative. There are, 14 500-yard buildings, 500-yard buildings, 2 and 3 floors high. And when we got that information, it was like everything started to click. Now, I want to read something. This just came to me a couple days ago, and I want to thank the gentleman. Tobias, I won't tell any more than that, but he said this. Steve, I'm a resident of Vero Beach, Florida, home of Rick Wiles True News. The Smithsonian just started a dig here in town between the health department and airport. They claim to my mother they are looking for pre-human bones. They claim to have bones that have a mixture of animal and human DNA. I want to say that again. They claim to have bones that have a mixture of animal and human DNA. Those would be called, ladies and gentlemen, chimeras. When asked if they were talking about giants and Nephilim, they said there are no such thing as giants and clammed up very nervously. Well, here you've got it. In the whole Florida Isthmus, the entire area around the Gulf Coast is riddled with giants, is riddled with bones. And so it evidently, here's what's happening. As the storms come, just as floods come, a lot of the bones are being revealed. And what's going to happen? You mark my words, everyone listening to this program. There are going to be simultaneous finds announced that will not be able to be covered up by the U.S. government as more and more countries turn against it. And when people see that everything they've been told in history, taught in history, is pretty much a lie. And here's the other question I want to answer right off of the top of this discussion. The reason why giants is a taboo is because it goes back to Genesis chapter 6, verse 4. And the sons of God saw that the daughters of earth were fair. It's interesting. I think, Tom, you said this, and it really got me going in a whole different train of thought. It was that the angels wanted to insert themselves into the human genome. They wanted to become human, and I'll be blunt, because of sex. And now we've got humans who want to become gods living for eternity. By the way, that's what angels possess, and The Bible teaches, it does not teach annihilation of the soul. It teaches that, you reap for eternity what you sow on earth. So the reason for the cover-up, let me say this another time, the reason for the cover-up is because it bears witness to the truth of the Old Testament. There are 33, interesting number. How many degrees are there in Masonry before you get into the super secret ones? 33 mentions of both Nephilim, translated giants, and Rephaim, or Rapha, translated the dead. And the Rephaim, is very, very fascinating because, again, in one of the scriptures, I think it's in Isaiah, it says, shall the dead rise to praise thee? I've got so many scriptures going on my head right now, if I don't mean to intentionally mislead. But that word dead is Rephaim. Here's another thing that most people have never put together, that in Ezekiel, the prophet, can these bones live? Well, you can take that as meaning the nation of Israel came back and God's going to raise up, all of the promises that are associated with classic dispensationalism. But what a lot of people don't understand is that in the book of Joel, he calls forth his mighty army. They run on the walls. They basically leap over the walls. And that's not talking about a bunch of gymnasts from China. It's talking about a supernatural sized entities that are part of God's army in the last days. And Tom, I think you and I spoke about this, maybe at your studio or at your home. It dawned on me, and I believe that was the Lord saying, take a look at this, Steve. The reason that the military is basically looking at the super soldier program, and by the way, it's going on all over the world. You can't even look at the front page of Drudge now without seeing human attenuation, human modification, Elon Musk talking about the brain. This is stuff that even the prehistory, before the Genesis 1:1 account of, or Genesis account of man being created in God's image and likeness in the book of Genesis, talks about technology. You see, Christians have always tried to compress time into 6,000 years. But again, I draw, everyone's attention. By the way, if people want to read some great stuff written by one of the most brilliant researcher, authors, ethnographers, archaeologists, anthropologists, Arthur Custance, you can go to custance.org and look at his Without Form and Void, Custance, CUSTANCE.org. So this is critical because it deals with the time before, or let's call it the times that the Illuminists, the priesthood, has chosen to keep all of the references to that period pretty well locked up. So, ladies and gentlemen, when we were concurrently putting together True Legends, the third DVD called The Holocaust of Giants, we originally started out with the title There Were Giants, but the Holocaust of Giants, the more that Tom investigated, the more that he went in, and I'll let you talk about the Sand Canyon incident. And for the record, we saw direct intervention by shadow people and shadow government with one of the people that Michael Herring had set up to talk to us, because if this isn't a fair statement, Tom and I are on camera, which you'll see in the DVD, talking about it, and boy, were some of the people in the National Park Service upset because it didn't fit at Mesa Verde, their common reason why the ruins there were abandoned. So, Tom, isn't it interesting that in all of your research, the Sand Canyon incident now was a curator of that whole find in the grisly, if you will, dismemberment and cannibalism of the Native Americans, that someone tipped them off not to talk to us? Go ahead,
sir.
Well,
yeah, I mean, absolutely. And by the way, people should know that I vetted Michael Herring, and I was able to find extensive documentation of his life and career as a curator, as a spokesman for the at the Smithsonian, as a PhD in American Indian art. Of course, the proof in the pudding for me and you, Steve, was the people that he got to sit down at the table with us, which we'd have never otherwise been able to meet with, but they had been friends of his for many, many years. So when I pointed out the Sand Canyon Pueblo dig, which had turned up very large Anasazi bone remains, gigantism, double row teeth, polydactyly, they had 6 fingers, 6 toes. These mutations that they dug up out of Sand Canyon Pueblo And the report, of course, was published on one of the Colorado University web pages, and I had read it and pointed it out to him. He got a hold of the people. They knew him. They knew him from years ago. By the way, there's even books written by him that were published by the Smithsonian that are at Amazon. But he set it up for us to meet with the people that had dug up those bones, and the bones, of course, were repatriated, which is a law that was passed in the 1970s, where you have to surrender the bones back to the nations, and then they're supposed to take those bones and rebury them. But they had the photographic evidence, all of the details about the double row teeth, all that, which is in the report. By the way, I can send that report to somebody if they want to email me. They can read the university's report on it. But we wanted to know about these unusually large mutations that they had dug up that were the remains of ancient Anasazi. So they agreed that they were going to meet with Steve and I and our team, our research team, and then all of a sudden, man, I don't know who said what to who, but all of a sudden they pulled out and said, no, thank you, don't call us no more, don't talk to us no more, don't anything. Tonight, I think we should disclose to the listeners some of the breakthrough information that we nevertheless uncovered on the topic of cannibalism, because there was the evidence of cannibalism there at Sand Canyon too, and the ancient secrets of giants' resurrection, and this key connection to what happened to the Anasazi. So we'll get into that in a moment, because you raised the whole issue of cannibalism a couple of times, but also, Steve, because you mentioned the Smithsonian storage buildings, I have a request in right now through Michael Herring to meet with one or more of his old Smithsonian curator friends that are still working today at the Smithsonian to ask, straightforward, let them answer any way they want, is there any truth to the conspiracy theory that their museums, their research centers that are administered by the government of the United States are hiding, concealing the bones of other spectacular giants that were removed from burial mounds in our nation's earliest history. Now, we're working right now to set up that interview, and there is a chance that we are going to get it. In fact, I'll read you just a clip out of Michael's latest email to me, very promising. He writes this. He says, Tom, I finally was able to make contact with one of my Smithsonian friends, Dr. Bruce. Now, by the way, he gives his last name, but I'm going to withhold it right now for Dr. Bruce's own privacy. I was able to talk to Dr. Bruce yesterday. He was one of the initial directors of the Museum Support Center, one of the Smithsonian's vast state-of-the-art warehouses, the size of 5 football fields and 2 and 3 storages high. They have 14 of these throughout Maryland and Virginia, which house more than 149 million objects. He could give us a lot of great background information, but most importantly, and I get what he says here in this email, most importantly, he just gave us a green light with regards to a philosophical approach to other Smithsonian staff that I know who might prove most interested in helping us to try and locate the giant bones. Bruce believes that scientific anomalies that could not be made sense of, like the giant bones, were stored away in these warehouses. He believes that searching the collections now for the bones of the giants is a valid investigation. We just need to talk to the right people. I hope to speak to 2 current senior Smithsonian staff members tomorrow, end quote. So you can imagine how excited I am to know that there really is a good chance, either before we release our new book and documentary in 3 weeks from now, or right after that, that we may finally have the chance to get to the bottom of one of America's greatest mysteries and the role that the Smithsonian played, or continues to play, in regard to a cover-up. Now, for those that don't know what the Great Smithsonian cover-up entails and how it's connected to the secret locations of giant bones, this is something that we deal with in great detail in the upcoming book, Unearthing the Lost World of the Cloud Eaters, including some of their own official reports that detail the giant remains of extraordinary size humans, their own reports from their own archives. So, again, this was information that I had heard talked about in conspiracy, circles on the internet and whatever for many, many years, but I had never actually seen or read evidence of what was dug up from underneath the burial mounds, other than very old newspaper articles. But I had never seen the evidence supported by official documents of the Smithsonian Institution until we got into this research. We reproduced that stuff in the book, Unearthing the Lost World of the Cloud Eaters. And let me say something here early on. If a person clicks on the Hagmann ad there that shows the copy of the book, or if you go to skywatchtv.com today, you'll see the video trailer up there talking about the documentary book. The book. We don't have the trailer yet. I'm waiting on that from Timothy Alberino and Steve Quayle. We don't yet have the trailer for the documentary film. I understand it's coming very soon. But the trailer for the book is up there. And then right below that, there's a little ad you can click on to pre-order. And if you pre-order the what we're calling the Cloud Eater Mega deal, you get the book and the documentary film at a discounted price. But in addition to that, you get 2 more other books free. You get a 24-hour audio collection with me and Steve Quayle talking about everything him and I have researched over the last 10 years. You get that free. But also, on checkout in the store, and we're only doing this for the Hagmann and Hagmann program, if you type in the promo code, either in the comment section or where it asks you for the code, if you type in Hagmann-Enoch, I'm going to have the warehouse also include the brand new hardback collector's edition of the Book of Enoch, which has the first ever narrative about how the giant cloud eaters arrived on Earth. So it's like over $200 worth of stuff we're going to give you for free if you pre-order over there. So just be aware of that. Also, sometime tonight, if we possibly could, I'd like to talk about, is there something that we can do to cause people to send in a donation to Hagmann and Hagmann? Because I got to tell you, folks, you're listening to this program. The Hagmanns don't ever beg for money. In fact, I'm probably embarrassing Doug by even bringing this up. These guys work their butt off. They never stop. They're willing to interview the most, cutting-edge people that the mass media, the fake news, as Donald Trump calls it, won't touch with a 10-foot pole. The people that try to control the narrative, like, in the old days, the doctrine of John Wesley Powell and the cover-up of the Smithsonian, where you have people like the Hagmann and Hagmann. They do this every day. They spend all their time. I think we should try to, I don't know. I don't really know what I'm saying because I'm kind of making this up as I go, but every time I'm on this program, I always think, man, it would be great if we could do something also for the Hagmann.
It's a blessing to our audience, yours and Steve's. So, thank you.
Hey, Doug, one of the things I think is critical for people to understand, too, is that what we're seeing right now throughout the mainstream news media, what we're seeing on the alien disclosure, as a matter of fact, Tom, it was pretty interesting because, Cliff Mahooty, who basically rattled everyone's cages, and God bless you, Cliff. I mean, seriously, he has an alien bolo tie, and you'll see that. And what was interesting after we were pulling out of where we're in Mesa Verde and having to go some other places and film, one of the Native American elders came up and said, "Oh, by the way, I was abducted." And I looked at him and I said, "By aliens?" He said, "Yes." You cannot separate the Native American legends from the sky people. And when you hear that we're going to be seeing, at the mouth of Jesus, that we're going to be seeing things that men's hearts will fail them, but you're also going to see the scripture, the epistle saying that, we're going to be bewildered with lying signs and wonders, all of Hollywood, in my opinion. Now, listen, I know we got guys listening to the show that are directors, people who have worked in Hollywood, with few exceptions, maybe 5%. Everybody in Hollywood is compromised, and they worship literally the God of forces, just like the book of Daniel declares, and they worship the author of forces. So right now, while Tom and I are on all these different, if you will, parallel research highways, God is opening up, and I mean this, God is opening up to us favor with different people. We want to thank each and every one of you that buys our books and buys our DVDs. The DVD, is going to be astonishing. Now, just for the record, these things are having an effect around the world, and they're having an effect because people are saying, I now get it. They used to say, I used to think God was cruel because he told the children of Israel to go in and wipe out every man, woman, and child, until they found out those weren't normal people. Those were hybrids. That's why God told the children of Israel, don't marry the people in the lands around you, because they were already genetically polluted. And what is the biggest field right now? Now I'm getting a little bit off, but here's the deal. If I told you there were studies done on genetics of the Apache and of different people that were basically claiming that the men in long ships came and built the great monuments in the Valley of the Gods, that this was even before the time of the Pueblo Indians, talking about the times, what in Australia they call dream time, and what I call the time before Genesis 1:1 and 1:2. Something caused a cataclysmic judgment on the earth. And cataclysm is the order of the day. Every time you look at anybody who's reporting on all the anomalies, whether it's the strange sounds, the strange weather, things that have never been seen before, you cannot get away from the fact that the times they are a-changing. And what we're watching now and what we're seeing, sometimes when we were in the desert Southwest, our mouths would drop open. Now let me fast forward. Tim Alberino and the film crew, when they were in Sardinia, interviewed a half a dozen eyewitnesses. Some of these guys were in their 80s and 90s. And by the way, they were speaking in Sardinian, which is a little bit different than Italian, so we had to hire translators, but it's clear and you can understand it. And what people have got to recognize is this, is there's a whole generation of Sardinians that claim to be descended from the giants. Now, in the giant tombs, here's what most people don't understand. It's the same thing the Native Americans have been doing for centuries. It's not the tombs that the giants are in. The tombs are underground. The people would lay on top the surface and basically go into the Nuragi towers to get and to channel the energy of the giants. And as most of you have heard me on Coast to Coast and on Doug Hagman and all the different shows, the giants, even their bones, possess an energy because they're supernatural. Their fathers were angels, their mothers were earth women, and people would say this, well, how can giants have sex with a normal-sized earth woman? It wasn't the giants, it was the fallen angels who can even take on whatever form or shape is necessary. And as Thomas said, genetically, they didn't just corrupt the angel, they corrupted everything that God saw was good in the book of Genesis forward. What are we seeing now? We're seeing, again, the bones of human and animal chimeras. I just read you that from a gentleman, by the way, that was dated, I think, 2 weeks ago. I read you the story of that. Now, hey, Tom, here's something that's mind-blowing, and I want to thank, and I'll just call P, because I don't want to use his name, and I'll just use it. Listen to this, okay? I think if you had to say something that God has just revealed, and this brother, I want to thank you personally for sharing that, is the fact that, and you'll love this, Eusebius, some people pronounce him Eusebius, but I just call him Eusebius. I was reading Preparatio Evangelica by Eusebius and came across a section that said that the giant Kronos, possibly Og, was held in stasis on an island near Britain. It also talks about the giant storms that appear when a giant is dug or megalithic site found. Now, this is from Book 5, Chapter 17. So then Philip had witnessed to his story, and some of those who were present and had heard it from an aged Emilian. But Demetrius said that there were many desert islands scattered among those on the coast of Britain, some of which were named after demons and heroes, and that he himself, being sent by the emperor to make an investigation survey, sailed to the nearest of the desert islands, which had but few inhabitants, and these are all sacred persons, inviolable to the Britons. Very soon after his arrival, there arose a great commotion there, and many portents in the sky, and violent blasts of wind, and falling of thunderbolts. And when this abated, the islanders said that one of the higher powers had been extinguished for as a lamp. They said, well, light, and listen to this, while lighted does no harm, but being extinguished is hurtful to many. So great souls are benignant and and harmless in their shining. Now listen to this. However, one island, which is called there was, however, one island there in which Kronos was confined and guarded in his sleep, Barbarous, for his sleep had been artfully contrived to keep him bound, and there were many demons about him as attendants and servants. According to Talos, a first-century Greek historian, Og is none other than Kronos. Both Og and Kronos were known as the leader of the Titans. So according to this, Og of Bashan is still alive in stasis somewhere near Britain, if he has not been moved. The city of London, the financial center of the world, celebrates two giants, Gog and Magog. Once a year they bring them out. They have giant, if you will, puppets, marionettes with no strings attached. I don't know any other way to describe them. Look up City of London, Gog and Magog. So what's fascinating, Tom, is right now that stasis word is the same word that multiple generals and special operations have used, that Dr. Ernst Muldeshef has used when he was taken to the caves of Tibet and shown a sleeping giant. The commonality of this, now we're talking Eusebius, we're talking a long time ago. The word stasis is absolutely now I would say this, a foundational principle of understanding how these giants are in a slumber. And when they awake, they will have no knowledge of the time that has been taken from them. Their natures will be the same. And as you've quoted before, go ahead and quote, Isaiah 13?
Yeah, Isaiah 13, open the gates, ye ruler, I give command, and I bring them. Giants are coming to fulfill my wrath.
So, given this information, by the way, until P gave this to me, again, thank you, brother, I did not know this. You know, here's the thing, ladies and gentlemen. We do the best we can. We do it with the budgets we have, with the people we have, and by the grace of God, He always makes up the difference. I've talked to different people about underwriting, some of these projects. I don't think people get it, Tom, and look, here's what I'm saying. We're on to the biggest news in history. I told one gentleman, I said, look, you're not going to just be, quote, famous, but you're going to be used by God to basically bring the biggest news to the planet, which will point people to Jesus Christ. Look, Tom, you have been a pastor in the Assembly of God. I grew up in the Assembly of God. I thank God for, the stuff that was good and the teaching and the full gospel and stuff, but also you got let out of there. I got let out of there. And what's interesting, ladies and gentlemen, and this is just a word of encouragement to everybody, you don't need to copy someone else's ministry. You can seek the Lord and He'll plug you in. And if the 139th Psalm says that more numerous in the sand than the sand of the sea, so are God's thoughts towards you, then, people who are praying that want to get involved, I'm sure, Tom, you want people email you or, the ones you see wanting to come alongside. Well, here's the deal. You've got to be called to this. And I know people, and I'm just saying this for the sake of those who really want to get involved in this. Well, what I'm trying to get people to see by the grace of God, and only He can open eyes and stuff, is that we are in a time where things are going to be released. Now, Tom, I'm sending you something. Are you on your computer? I'm going to read it for everyone, but are you on your computer?
I'm not.
Okay. Let me give you something that will blow your mind. It's from a friend of mine who was a FEMA, I guess you call it, commander. She's one of the most brilliant women, with no flattery, I've ever met. She's one of the best connected women I've ever met. And she basically knows what's going on. Now, I'm going to read this. I just got this. It came in at 5:58, okay? Opened up my email. It's germane to what I'm going to say next. I received an email today that has some links you may be interested in. This is also an alert of sorts. The Smithsonian has teamed up with FEMA under the guise of preservation of family and cultural treasures and photos lost to natural disasters as an effort to secure these treasures and give people hope. I'll just give you my quick interpretation of that, to make sure nothing we don't want gets out. The predators are gathering and circling over the American prey in preparation for a natural disaster event as has happened in other countries. Other agencies and NGOs are also participating. To put up a bear fence here requires an archaeologist to evaluate the property for artifacts. I hope, Doug, as an investigator, I'm sending this to you and Tom, okay, and I'm going to post this with all the links. But what's astonishing to me is then she says, and I think obviously she says, of course you can apply it to giants. Tom Horn and I on this date, what is it, April 27th, 2017, are on the Hagman and Hagman show talking about the Great Smithsonian cover-up. We're getting an email, I'm getting it, which I'm going to share with Tom, and just for verification, validation, Doug, that's talking about a new teaming up of the Smithsonian with FEMA under the guise of preservation of family and cultural treasures and photos lost to natural disasters, an effort to secure these treasures and give people hope. What's your first response to that, Tom?
Well, I mean, this is the doctrine of John Wesley Powell all over again. I mean, all the way through the 1800s, these exploration teams that were commissioned by the Smithsonian went into the Grand Canyons. Mahudi told us that while he was serving as the representative of the U.S. government for tribal affairs, that the U.S. government sent a team up above the Grand Canyon. Remember, in fact, maybe I shouldn't give this away. It might be in your documentary film.
No, you can give it away. I want people to understand.
He gives the facts and data on how they went up above the Grand Canyon, dug this gigantic shaft, going down through the side of the Grand Canyon to the bottom, down below the bottom, where behind this waterfall there was this Stargate, and he gives vivid detail about exactly what happened. But this was all covered up by the U.S. government. They talked about up there drilling for some kind of ore experiment or some other thing, and he said it was absolutely baloney. What they were doing is they were trying to figure out what was going on with what the Native Americans down inside that canyon were using as a doorway, as a portal. Well, Wesley Powell, I mean, today it's called the Powell Doctrine. The whole point about him was he was exceptionally bent toward rationalizing away any evidence that would challenge the evolutionary theory, which the bones of giants absolutely did. And so even some of the American Indian academics have written, and these are guys with PhDs too, who publish books that teach on the reservation schools that have said that there is no doubt whatsoever that there really honestly is a large Indiana Jones-like building into which the Great Smithsonian spirited away the bones of extraordinary humans. And some of these were up to 20, 30 feet tall, according to the tribal leaders that we talked to. But I'm currently running a series right now on skywatchtv.com in which I'm talking about the doctrine of Wesley Powell. And what you're saying right now, Steve, sounds like a continuation of this same idea. You have to control the flow of information if you're a naturalist, if you're a Darwinian, if you don't want anything to challenge. Or in some cases, it's not really that you're all that concerned about something challenging Darwinian evolution as much as you don't want people to see evidence that the story of the Bible, that the Old Testament is a true narrative of events that historically actually happened. That's really what they're more afraid of, is that people will understand that the Bible is true. And therefore, the story of the Old Testament and the coming of Jesus Christ and all of those experiences are real. And they don't want people to be faced with this need to make a decision towards God and Christ.
And I think that what's critical is right now, I remember starting on talk radio 25, 27 years ago, whatever it was, and there are people that know the exact date quite candidly. I guess it's important, a quarter of a century, let's say. But I can tell you this, that God has been so faithful, Tom, and I want to put everybody in remembrance. One guy said, why do you always brag about what you knew about in advance? I don't brag about it. I give God the glory because I say, and I want everyone to hear this from me, a man has nothing except he receive it from above. And that's when the Lord spoke to me, and those of you who were with me in KHNC, Johnstown, Colorado, Randy and a bunch of you will probably remember this. I said, Lord has spoken to my heart that when cannibalism headlines of the major news media that the Great Tribulation has started. Now, people argue with that. They say, we're not in the tribulation, blah, blah, blah. I won't argue that. But I could not have known that when I said it. And now, why this is critical is the appetite of demons expressed through humans, and the demons are a disembodied, if you will, the evil spirits that proceed out of the giants. I want to read Numbers 13:31 through 33. If those people that say, and I call them crybaby whiners, okay, this isn't important, it's really important. You can't fight the war that is against you if you do not understand the nature of your enemy, his tactics, and how to defeat him. Now, Numbers 13:31-33, King James. But the men that went up with him, going with Joshua and Caleb, said, we be not able to go up against this people, for they are stronger than we. And they brought up an evil report of the land which they had searched unto the children of Israel, saying, the land through which we have gone to search, it is a land that eateth up the inhabitants thereof, and all the people that we saw in it are men of a great stature. And there we saw the giants, the sons of Anak, which come of the giants, and we were in our own sight as grasshoppers, and so we were in their sight. That word, eateth up. I mean, people say, well, that's just a metaphor for people that were too weak militarily. You go look it up, and devour means to eat, literally, to cannibalize, to ingest, digest. And so, what I think is astonishing tonight, and boy, I just see this as God's fingerprint. Again, thank you, Celeste. Is the fact that somebody's incredibly worried about all the natural disasters happening, and under the guise of, quote, protecting the Native Americans, let me tell you something that we were told by them. Only 6% of Native American lands, especially sacred places, will they allow them to go to. 6%. So the question is, what's the other 94%? Tom and I both have we refer to it, the Native American Sacred Sites in the Department of Defense. You can go search for that online. Native American Sacred Sites and the Department of Defense. What Tim Alberino found in Sardinia, in Malta, we found it in Rome, we found it in Cusco, we found it in Bolivia, at Tiwanaku. We find it every place we go. It's not what you see on top of the ground that's critical, it's what's underneath. Same thing with the Giza Plateau. Some of those famous hydrologists and geologists have stated that the Great Pyramid of Giza and the Sphinx have had multiple floods. Well, I got news for you. You can say, well, it was just a single flood. The evidence would, argue against that. So what is, I think, so critical is to try and Tom, am I getting this across? Because if you can say it better, please do. The complete control that the powers that be, the shadow government, the darkness, the, if you will, the Illuminists, the global Satanists, they don't want the truth out. Because as long as they can divorce the false paradigm that they're going to present to the world, then people will not come to the saving knowledge of Jesus Christ. In essence, ladies and gentlemen, I'll make it easy for you. We're not doing this just to present cool stuff, which it truly is. We're doing this at the command and direction of the living God to warn you and to let you know what's coming. For the Scripture says, surely the Lord God will do nothing except he reveals his secrets to his servants, the prophets. Daniel talked about it. Sir Isaac Newton talked about that in the end time, a group of men would be raised up amongst much clamor and criticism, that God would be revealing his secrets to. So go to this, Native American Sacred Sites in the Department of Defense. You'll find out. I found out last week. Maybe I'll just share this, and I won't go into great detail. I'll turn it right back to you. I went to a couple places, from everywhere from Chaco Canyon in the air, all the way to the Grand Canyon. I went through some of the most strange landscape that, quite candidly, Tom, I never knew existed. I was basically following my hunch. Now, I don't know if people know this. This is very cool. But in a helicopter, you can get what's called a 5-axis gimbal that you can put some of the sharpest camera lenses and cameras, movie cameras, in it, and you can remain totally stable at 120 knots. That's about 135 miles an hour. We traveled 1,000 miles in 9.5 hours. The only thing we did was stop to take a potty break and fill up with gas. We had to, for those of you helicopter pilots, we could only run about 65% fuel because of the weight of the camera. It was so telling and compelling. If I told you, Tom, and I think I already gave you, I won't give it away yet until people in Branson are going to have the mind-blowingest experience of seeing some of this stuff. And I want to share something, ladies and gentlemen. This isn't a bait or a hook, but what we're going to do, because we've got some of the state-of-the-art, and I can guarantee you this, if there's however many people will show up, at least probably 5% will be intelligence agencies from all over the world. And and so this is critical stuff. And again, when you enable Doug Hagman, and I want to make this clear, Tom, you weren't asked, I wasn't asked, but those of you around the world, would you please just even think of sending $5? Because, Doug and Joe and the team there, John and everybody that's associated with it, there are people out there with big bucks. And I know there are times, and I'm sensitive because when I've watched it happen, that you don't realize what puts it on. And I want to ask you, everyone who's listening to this program tonight, if you were not able to have Hagman and Tom Horn, myself, and all the great guests they have on, where would you go to get the information? Where would you go? And unfortunately, Tom, we know this to be human nature. People always will say in retrospect, I wish I would have helped him. I should have helped him. I could have helped him. And for those of you that have helped us, Cam and Jan and others, Gary H., Gary Haven, David, all of you that have helped us, every single person that's given $100, and I'm not begging for money, I'm just telling you this, is that we have the odds stacked against us. When Tim and the team were in Sardinia, the papal helicopter was in the air. The little guys in their cars, the spies on their phones were we kept them busy. But what's associated with all this stuff is the fact that, ladies and gentlemen, one of the richest, wealthiest directors in Hollywood, James Cameron of Titanic fame, Good Night, Avatar, all the different stuff he's done, Terminator, movies that are blockbusters. He's spending huge dollars to find Atlantis. Guess what? They even went to Sardinia, but they didn't see what was in front of them. Now fast forward. How is it that the navigators in Sardinia, who claim to be the descendants of giants, that their structures show up in America? Their towers show up in America. Right. The same religious practices. So, boy, I'm telling you what, I'm like, ready to launch on this. This is the most tremendous, what would you say, Tom? Mind-opening. God has his hand on it, and I'm excited that, we get to be part of it. But not only that you all get to be included in it. Everybody's got questions. Look, we don't have all the answers, but we're not sitting out there copying people on YouTube or, doing that. We're out doing the original stuff. So please, ladies and gentlemen, continue to pray for us. And if any of you are able to help us in a big way, look, I know a lot of people, and so does Tom, and we know a lot of people all over the world. But if I could tell you that you can have what you've been looking for in answers, I think it would be provocative. And that's the same reason why Tom brought up Doug Hagman and I bring him up because, listen, ladies and gentlemen, if Doug and I told you what's going on behind the scenes against us, you wouldn't believe it. And we won't even give time to that. Number one, we can't because we're told we can't. But the point that I think is critical is that there is no place on planet Earth, in my opinion, that God has chosen at this time to present this information. Doug's not perfect. I'm not perfect. And Tom is probably one of the most articulate men. I wish I could be as coherent as you, Tom.
Yes, there is. And thank you, Tom and Steve, for being so generous and urging people to do this. It's so much appreciated. But there is a PayPal button on HagmanReport.com or HagmanandHagman.com. And then we have our P.O. box, our mailing address there as well.
And, you know, thank you both, because I have to say this. It does take money. We pay salaries here. We're supporting 5 families, and thank you. In advance,
well, and I know, you know, that people get accustomed to listening to the program. They don't ever really stop and think about what it takes. And I also, you know, because I own a company, and in the past we used to do advertising, and you make very little money actually comes in as a result of advertising other people's products. But you guys have worked hard. You've done it with very little. So I'm hoping that, and you know what, even what Steve said a moment ago, if somebody's listening to this program and they're thinking, well, you know, I don't have a whole lot of money. I probably couldn't give more than $10. But if enough people did that, it would matter, and some people can give more. So I really hope that people will respond to that. Go to your websites, find the PayPal button, or if they can send a check to your mailing address. And folks, you need to know that the Hagmans never ask us anything about this. It totally is just me and Steve bringing this up because we appreciate so much what they've done to help us get the word out on our research. And anytime, every time we've had a breakthrough moment, the Hagmans have been, you know, forefront and center, and they're brave. They're willing to let us talk about stuff that other people run away scared from. So,
yeah, with their tails between their legs going meow.
Yeah, that's right. Now, I want to, Steve, let me jump back for just a second. You mentioned
sure, take all the time you want, Tom. Finish your thoughts.
You mentioned that Department of Defense article. You actually quote that in the first half of the book, and people should know this book is broken into 2 parts. The whole first half's written by you, the second half's written by me. But you quote that Department of Defense. You give the link back to the Department of Defense where the article can be found. And I read part of that and was absolutely blown away because they are actually studying from a scientific point of view ancient Stargate technology that is connected to the American Indian tribe and how that technology is used to open doorways into parallel realities. It was unbelievable. I had to verify it for myself. I thought, really, this can't possibly be real. But it is. And we even had Allie Anderson, one of my research analysts of the Department of Defense, and the people that authored that article and got permission for you to quote a lengthy portion of that and then to put the references in the books. So I wanted to point that out, that you had briefly mentioned it, but people may not realize that this DoD report actually talks about American Indian artifacts, including Stargate technology, and the way it is used to make contact with other realities. Now, the other thing you were talking about a moment ago that I want to get on is ritual cannibalism and the role that plays, because at first, when you think about ritual cannibalism, you don't really understand the depth to the extent to how this was important to the ancient societies, starting all the way back with the Watchers, but including the American Indian tribes and the Mesoamerican tribes, and what it was used for. When we were in the Four Corners, here about whatever it was, 5-6 months ago, and we had that great big round table, 1 week long. Basically, you rented out the whole hotel, and we had it at our beck and call for the most part. And we sat with those tribal elders. They pointed out to us the mountain range where the giant bones are, and we're going back there when we get permission to get back on the res. They agreed unanimously that these bones are going to be reanimated at a soon specific time time. I think this stuff is covered in the documentary film, is partly covered in the book. But they also begin describing something that until then I was really unfamiliar with. You may have known about it, Steve. I didn't. Serious association with cannibalism, the Raphaim, and even Og, who you were talking about a moment ago, of Bashan. First, there's always been this question about how do the giants that are destroyed in the flood, and now they're in the underworld realm of the dead, the Raphaim, the spirits of the dead giants. How can they be revived? How do they return? If the Native Americans today are talking about these bones being reanimated, the giants returning, but also how do the giants return after the flood that's talked about in the Bible? How did they reappear on earth again, which they did? And there's several fascinating theories involving that question, some of which we've discussed before, others we could discuss later tonight if we have time. But it was during this 2-year, or really altogether, Cloud Eater investigation, and more recently towards the end of 2016, that we unearthed this critical ancient belief involving cannibalism and what was believed in the Middle East at the dawn of time, including what was believed by the Maya, what was believed by Aztec, and apparently the Anasazi, and this bizarre idea that through cannibalism, their DNA would be modified. Basically, their genetic makeup would be reconstructed through ritual cannibalism, not cannibalism because you're starving to death and therefore, you're stuck up on the top of a mountain in an ice storm and somebody eats, part of the leg of a human, or not that. Ritual cannibalism was used intentionally to modify their genetic makeup to do what we would call out of the Hebrew Bible to cause them to become a fit extension for incarnation by the spirits of dead giants, and so on. So now this requires a little bit of unpacking, so I won't take very long, but give me a couple of minutes. I'll try to keep it simple and shorter than all the research that we include in the new Cloud Eaters book and the companion documentary film. But so where did this idea begin with? That through ritual cannibalism, a body's genetic makeup could be modified to become a fit extension for incarnation by fallen angels. Where did that begin with? Well, it began with the Watchers. It began literally at the dawn of time. The idea that Raphaim could be resurrected into a body. Now, why do I say that? First of all, note how in the Bible, according to 2 Peter 2:4, Jude 1:6, and the apocryphal book of Enoch, which the Bible writers are quoting from, that the Watchers were interested in leaving their fixed habitation in heaven and in becoming incarnate on earth. And they saw human genetic material as the methodology for this advent, the creation of a hybrid body made of human. And earlier you said that this DNA that was discovered had human and animal DNA in it. Well, that also, according to some of the extra biblical texts, like the book of Jasher, it discusses how they used both animals and humans. Of course, the book of Enoch says they also sinned against the animals, and the Old Testament also implies that. So there was also something going on there with animal genetic material. But in any case, they saw this blend of human, animal, angelic material as something that they could extend themselves into. And if we have time later and people want, I can get more into the details of how that ancient science technology actually worked. But the point is, it's indisputable, according to these ancient texts and scriptures, that entering our dimensional reality and exiting their heavenly estate is what the Watchers wanted to do. And the result of that event was the birth of the giant clans, what some people commonly call the Nephilim, the Gibborim, the Anunnaki, and so on, that went on to become the scourge of the earth. Now, secondly, so that event happened. Secondly, immediately after, the giants, the mutations are born from that unholy wedlock. These giants are filled with the vile appetite of the fallen watchers see. You can read the ancient text, the Book of Watchers. You can read the Animal Apocalypse. You can read the Book of Jubilees. You can read the Book of Giants from the Qumran text. You can read Enoch, starting at chapter 7 and forward. All of them start describing this insatiable appetite of these giants, these offspring of the Watchers. And furthermore, they describe it as being key to understanding their crimes, which included murder, cannibalism, and the consumption of blood. By the way, there's an academic paper on this that is first class. It's titled Monstrous Appetite, Giants, Cannibalism, and Insatiable Eating in Enochic Literature. It was written by Professor Matthew Goff of Florida State University, and I can email that to anybody that might really want to take time to learn more about that. But what we learn through a careful reading of these ancient texts reveals that the appetites of the giants, now get this, the appetite of the dead giants, the Raphaim, in their underworld state, where they're down there now, and they can no longer eat persons, which in Enoch 7, I mean, their appetite is crazy. They eat everything. Animals, humans, they eventually even start eating each other. It's insatiable, right? Part of the judgment against them, though, is that now, in the underworld, they can no longer eat persons, and it drives them insane. And this is actually part of their judgment because they can no longer be satisfied, and it's that torture, the desire of these spirits that is manifest when they affect the minds of humans that will allow them to be influenced. When they possess, this idea that the dead Nephilim, some of them became the demons that are on the world today, right? But they're also connected with the Raphaim in the underworld. They're all part of the same consort, but 10% of them, according to all these ancient texts, were allowed to remain on the earth. And according to some people's theology, these are the demons that infest the earth today. And so they tempt individuals. They affect the minds of individuals, and they compel those individuals, if possible, towards cannibalism. Why? In two reasons. In order that the demon spirit can satisfy their overwhelming original hunger to consume humans, and now through the individuals that they possess. And Steve, you're correct when you said that all of a sudden cannibalism is a big thing. Oh my gosh, there are so many movies, there's so many things that are coming out right now on human cannibalism, articles that are being written about it, and they're being written in a way as if they're studying this in an appreciable way. I mean, almost as if there's some good that could be evaluated from human cannibalism. There was that journalist, I forget what his name was, but people can Google this and read about it, this journalist for one of the major news media outlets that recently went to another country and consumed part of a human brain or something with the cannibals that were there, and they're legitimizing all of this in mainstream journalism. I mean, it's sick, right? But anyway, so I don't get off the track here, that what the spiritual forces are doing, they're satisfying their own demonic hunger through individuals that practice cannibalism. But secondly, the person participating willingly in that process is thought by ancient standards to become genetically modified. That's to say, when in the beginning of their practicing cannibalism, and their conscience is telling them that this is an ultimate rejection of Yahweh, this is a sin against His creation, but they keep doing it anyway, day by day, they become less and less the imager of God, as Sharon Gilbert likes to say it. We were created in God's image to reflect His image, the imagers of God. They become less and less of that, and instead they become the imagers of the fallen one. And during that time, the ancient belief was that the DNA of the host participant, the human, is slowly being rewritten, changed, modified into something other than what God created, which allows either the modern individual today or the ancient original mutant humans in the days of Noah to become a fit extension for incarnation by Raphaim. Now, here's the important question. Is that just a silly myth? An ancient belief that doesn't have any basis in scientific reality? Well, we now know by the way, we now know what these ancient writers couldn't possibly have known, because they didn't have, as far as we know, the capacity to be able to study DNA like we do today. We now know, though, that idea is a scientific fact, that germline genetic modification occurs through cannibalism. And there's a famous example of this that emerged in just recent years. It could be Googled. There's articles just published last year and this year that can be read by anybody, involving the Foray people of Papua New Guinea, who, through cannibalizing the brains of their dead, developed an anti-kuru. Kuru is a neurodegenerative disorder, but they developed an anti-kuru gene that actually strengthened their genetic makeup and protects them against that disease, and it became germline and is passed on to all succeeding generations. And this is only one article. There's several others that provide examples. And by the way, if people want to Google that article and read it, I have it in front of me. It's called "Gene Change in Cannibals Reveals Evolution in Action." But it verifies that this ancient idea is something that actually really does occur. Through cannibalism, the genetic makeup of the human is slowly rewritten until over time the person becomes something else. Now, in Indian lore, some of the information they learned from the giant dragon-worshipping interlopers, maybe we'll get into that later, that came down through Mesoamerica, Baja, these other giants came down, wiped out the Anasazi, some of the early American Indian tribes. But don't forget that some of their stories around this involve what they call the Wendigo, which means the evil spirit that devours mankind. This is the name that's associated with the word cannibal, actually. A lot of it is talked about up or close to Canada, but there are legends in the Navajo region here, the American Midwest, where, according to their ancient stories, these were evil creatures. Sometimes they were giants, sometimes as much as 15 feet in height. But at one time, they were human beings. This is the point about this. And what they say is that once a person turns to cannibalism, even under emergency or starvation circumstances, if they continue cannibalism, they become changed forever. Not just in their mind, not just in their heart, not just because they've rejected God, but their genetic makeup literally begins to become modified. The evil spirit takes hold of them, and they're permanently transformed into this evil being. So I would encourage people, maybe Google the Wendigo, look at how flesh, blood, it's all a part of the elements that can transform humanity, a person, an individual, into a fit extension for incarnation by underworld entities. So I kind of got off track there a little bit, so let me get back on track. There's another connection to the mysticism of cannibalism, and its connection to why the Watcher offspring participated in it, that's connected to human blood in academic circles as a life force from God. I've read several scholars when they're talking about, why were the offspring of the Watchers so cannibalistic and eaters of human flesh and drinkers of blood? Why were they doing that? And some of these scholars point out how in the Bible eating blood is condemned in the Old Testament, and that among other things, that might be because it's associated with the moment when God breathed life into mankind, the breath of life, and man became a living soul. In other words, that there could be something in human blood dating back to God, connected to God, that the Watchers and the Nephilim wanted to consume to either somehow, steal divinity or to profane God or both. But there probably is something to this idea that the reason that God condemned the eating of blood is because it originated with the Watchers, was practiced by the Nephilim, and had something to do with profaning the human body in order to modify the genetic makeup of mankind into something other than what God had created. But in either case, following the descent of the Watchers and the proliferation. Am I going on too much here?
No. Keep going, and because again, when you need a break, I'm just telling you, I'm going to prove to people that this is even of it's of web-bot concern, and I would tell everyone should get Cliff High's halfpasthuman.com, the WebBot report for May. But go ahead, Tom, because just finish your thought, because I'm going to take off right from what you say.
Okay, so I'll try to make it fast, but here's the point, that literally from the dawn of time, this idea proliferated across the world. Here in it came here to the Americas. It was among the Aztec. It was among the Maya, but it was all throughout the Middle East. It was all a part of all of the Mesopotamian, the ancient ideas around the world. This cult ritual idea that by eating alive or by drinking the blood of a person and sometimes an animal, that you would somehow capture the essence or the soul of that victim. It's called homophagia in some academic circles. You can read about the earliest Norwegian huntsmen who believed in this idea. They would drink the blood of bears to capture their strength. East African Maasai warriors practicing that. They sought to gain the strength of the wild by drinking the blood of lions. Human victims, though, were the preferred victims in many cultures, especially here closer to home, Mesoamerica, the Maya, the Aztec, later the Anasazi, which we document in our book, and our tribal confidants at our private meeting with them said the same thing. Now, the last program we were on, we were talking about the Podesta emails, spirit cooking. So you can also see this practice continues today in cults, Satanists, even secret societies. It illustrates that not only is it ancient, but it's modern. There's an ongoing effort on the part of Satan to convince as many as he can. And now, all of a sudden, Steve, your prophecy is coming to pass, that cannibalism would be a part of the end times. Who would have ever thought this? I mean, 25 years ago when I was a pastor, I would have laughed in your face. I'd have said, what? No way, right? All of a sudden, it's a cultural meme. It's a phenomenon. It's having a shocking revival. And you can see how not only the ancient idea of becoming a fit extension, but it's also it's a demonization of the Eucharist, the Holy Communion. The goal of Holy Communion in our different, Christian-based churches, transubstantiation in the Catholic Eucharist, or consubstantiation in the Lutheran Communion, or a symbolic ordinance in the Protestant evangelical circles. All of these have a common goal of elevating the worshiper of Christ into sacramental communion with God. But the goal of the ritual of cannibalism, ancient and modern, is just the opposite, the tearing apart, the eating alive of the one cannibalized. Whole idea is to capture the essence of the Raphaim and to bring it into this incarnated rage with man. So let me bring up one other important point, Steve, and I'll turn it back over to you about this ancient belief, because this is something you brought up earlier. It might be connected to the point you're going to make. But the relationship between ritual cannibalism as a technology, as a methodology for incarnation by spirits of dead giants, this is connected to the Raphaim, who were the giant occupants of Canaan, but also Og, the king of Bashan, whose bed was 18 feet long, and the Watcher sins. All of this is connected. Og and the Raphaim were associated by the ancients with the shades of the dead, including the dead Nephilim in Sheol, Hades, and the potential for their resurrection. So I'll just give this to you very quickly. Og was the king of the Amorites who ruled in the region of Bashan, where the gates of hell were believed to be. His bed's 9.5, almost 9.5 cubits. But it's exactly, down to the millimeter, the exact same size of a cultic bed that was discovered in the ziggurat at Adamananki, which most archaeologists identify with the real Tower of Babel. And the large bed there was found in what was, and I can't say it in the Ugaritic language, but what it means is the house of the bed. And this was where the god Marduk and his wife Zarpanatu would meet annually. Guess for what reason? For ritual, procreation, the whole idea of raising up from out of the underworld into incarnation these ancient underworld entities, and also blessings upon the land. So it was a fertility type rite. But I and others are very suspicious that this actually played a role in deity incarnation, not just as a parody, but an effort to raise dead Nephilim to whom Og was related. And then lastly, on the meaning of the word Raphaim, this is really germane because it carries with the word Raphaim carries with it the idea to heal or to be healed, as in a resurrection from the place of the dead. And in the ancient Ugaritic Rosh Hashanah text, the Raphaim are described as these demigods that worship the Amorite god Baal, the ruler of the underworld. And when the Raphaim died, their spirits went into the underworld, where they joined Baal's acolyte assembly of lesser gods and kings and heroes and rulers. This is important. I'll tell you why in a moment. These beings had the power in Amorite theology to return from the dead through reincarnation into bodily form as Nephilim. And in fact, the Raphaim giants are specifically noted by Moses in the Old Testament as being the return of the antediluvian Nephilim, that the Raphaim were in fact the reincarnation of the demonic spirits of the Nephilim giants that had been destroyed in the flood. Now, it might be a surprise to many Bible students to learn that the prophet Isaiah seems to have considered this Amorite dogma factual. In other words, it was actually a true revelation from God that they stole and made part of their mythology. But he ties the power of these beings to the king of Babylon and Lucifer himself. So after prophesying against the leader of Babylon, here's what Isaiah says in parallel to Raphaim theology in Isaiah 14:9-10. He says, "Hell," that is Sheol, Hades, "from beneath is moved for thee to meet thee at thy coming. It stirreth up the dead," this is the Raphaim, "for thee, even all the chief ones of the earth. It hath raised up from their thrones." This is in the underworld. "It has raised up from their thrones all the kings of the nations, and they shall speak and say unto thee, Art thou also become weak as we? Art thou become like unto us?" End quote. And then immediately following that statement, Isaiah looks beyond the Raphaim at who their Baal actually is, and he identifies him in verse 12, saying, "How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning?" And so you can find throughout the Bible, Job 26:5, dead things that you quoted earlier, dead things are formed from under the waters. This idea that underneath the surface of the earth, that the earth is dynamic, and squirming beneath the surface of the earth are giants that went down into hell, according to the Old Testament, in full battle dress, awaiting the moment of their reanimation, the moment of their resurrection. So go, Steve.
Well, I think, too, in release, because the Native Americans told us that there was something holding it back, like my friend the pilot that flew the giant out of Bagram Air Force Base, and L.A. Marzulli and I did a show together that I think is so much of a watershed event. And for the record, everyone, L.A. put me in contact with one of the guys that was the shooter, and they were told specifically in their training to aim high, to shoot with a grenade launcher, a 40-millimeter grenade at the head, in essence, to take the head of the giants off. And they didn't understand why they were being told that until the reports came back of what had to happen, because David cut off Goliath's head for a reason. It wasn't just to show his triumph, which God did give him the triumph over Goliath, but because of the energy, the life energy force, and this is where the myth of the Green Man, the legend of the Green Man comes into play. These things can literally reanimate, like a salamander losing its tail. That's why the head has to come off. And I want to just share this. All I've ever been told by the people that fight these things are three things. Number one, you've got to use solid copper, and this is germane to what I'm going to share next. You've got to use solid copper, heavy caliber weapons. That doesn't mean copper plate. It doesn't mean copper, pellets and like number 4 buck or whatever, double-aught buck. It means like things like elephant caliber guns. It means like M249 and the 308 machine guns with solid copper rounds. The solid copper poisons the bloodstream. And I asked every form of copper I could think of. People sent me emails, can I do copper arrowheads? The Native Americans did, and they would have to fire hundreds of them. But at the end of the day, they had to take down and take off the head of the giants. And Tom, what's fascinating to me, they also told me, these are special operations guys that kill these things. You have to use smoke because the giants have to have their olfactory sense, which is very keen. You have to confuse it. And so, that's about it that I know, and that's all I was ever told. Because, again, I ask questions about heat, like flamethrowers. I ask questions about extreme cold. Nope, none of that stuff works. And so what's fascinating is the ancient copper mines in the Upper Peninsula, or Solomon's mine. Copper was more important than, quote, the Bronze Age. Copper was used in weaponry. Even in the desert Southwest, we had a gentleman who sent me the photos, and now he's got a DVD out, and talking about the if you will, the giant king and queen who are clad in copper armor. And what's very critical to understand is that we're going to have to deal with this. Now, I want to read this from the webbots. Now, Tom, you and I were in the desert Southwest, led, L-E-D by, or L-E-A-D, whichever way you spell it, led there by the living God. And here's what Cliff High, I would tell everybody, the reports are inexpensive. Page 29 of a 38-page report. This is critical for you to understand. When you're dealing with the spirit realm, even words and all that's out there in cyberspace, you really think that some of the smartest fallen angels in the history of their creation don't know how to type, or don't know how to use the technology that they're behind? I'm going to say this. This is going to blow your mind, Tom. The pharaohic Egyptian meme, meaning the theme, is going to be very wide across humanity over this year. Now, listen to this. He goes on to say, in other sets, we have both Grand Canyon as well as separate indicators for Southwest North America, which discovery of ancient Egyptian artifacts, language, and that their items will be appearing. Now, what's important is I just got another email. God bless you, my brother. He said this. He's a member of a SWAT team for the DHS. They're now being assigned to guard FEMA in their undertaking. He didn't know what it was about until we were talking tonight. If this isn't cool, I don't know how to explain cool. I mean that the hand of the Lord. Now listen, other sets or themes have military involved in excluding civilian populations from the find. Note that this episode has more geographic references to the American Southwest than other areas. Now, these sets, Cliff High speaking, also describe a fight that will occur between locals and military over removal of artifacts. And they go out by basically officialdom is going to freak out after they learn that a number, like hundreds of thousands of the artifacts have gone missing. So they're talking, the central theme is this, that new discoveries underground, forbidden archaeology, and all of this ancient technology with diagrams, machinery, and everything, it's coming out. And here's one of the most fascinating things. I made this statement, and I write about pyramids in this book, and not from a New Age or a cult, but basically there's going to be, you're going to love this, a reactivation of pyramids from around the world with, in essence, a visible force that's going to be seen. So it's like something's going to activate the pyramids. And in my understanding, and you know this too, you teach it's the gate of the gods, that the Stargate, that the capstone, and I can share this with you, that at one point, a number of years ago, is when the Epic of Gilgamesh, the tomb of Gilgamesh was found. Special forces had gone in ahead of time, but it was at the time that you received the Iraqi information from the museum before your house mysteriously, and you know me, I've never maintained otherwise, was intentionally set on fire. And ladies and gentlemen, there's a whole story. I think we talked about it. But the point being is, Tom, last week, the Stargate that you see on my website on the photo of the day, people say it just looks like a big indentation. Yeah, big as in 13 feet, was submitted by a photographer who knows what we're talking about, and he said he had the most unusual feeling. He said when he saw it, he instantly knew what it was. Now, why were you and I and Timothy Alberino, our film crews in the desert Southwest? Again, when Jesus, I hope that people get this point. When Jesus said, "Get thee behind me, Satan," it literally means follow after me. It's like the parable of the seed that falls on the different ground. It's like the seed that grows up, some good, some weeds, but it's up to God to send the angels. I hope this is getting across to everyone. In other words, the major themes that are coming out. I better read this one email. I mean, this is chilling. And Doug, I'll send all this to you so you can you know the person that sent this to me.
Yep.
And he says this. This is active in DHS. Isn't it funny that DHS just made a specialized response team of elite military veterans who are DHS law enforcement officers who are now FEMA's direct security force during national security events, natural disasters that cause state of emergencies? That is directed by the President and Secretary of DHS. And here you are speaking of these situations, and we are the protectors of said situations. And my brother that sent that to me, if you think of all, your future in the months ahead, look at how God is preparing you to deal with this when you have to deal with it. So what we're seeing right now, and that was a not coded message, but an encouraging message to the person that sent that. The idea is simply this. Ladies and gentlemen, by unlocking the keys that Thomas Horn has been led to research, write about, by Timothy Alberino's, and I can tell you this, Tim did the most amazing job of writing the script, and things would flow in. He even said it to me today. And by the way, Tom, I think the trailer will be ready by next week. It's just got to be mastered on Monday. When people hear and see the images of what truly went on and put this into perspective, and if you want to challenge, go ahead. Go buy Half Past Human, the web bots. I think halfpasthuman.com, and you can just look up Cliff High Webbot, HIGH. You'll be blown away. You will absolutely be blown away. So, the bottom line is, you've got to recognize that we're not on the cutting edge of history. We're on the proclamation of real history, and God's giving you a warning. And Tom, you know the scripture. God says, surely the Lord God will do nothing. I quoted earlier, but he also says his people are destroyed for lack of knowledge and here's the best news yet. You don't have to be afraid about this stuff. Jesus said, behold, I give you power to tread on serpents and scorpions and over all the power of the enemy, and nothing shall by any means hurt you. But this just is exciting to me to see. And by the way, I just got an email too. The Song of Hiawatha by Longfellow talks about how the giants ripped huge boulders from the mountains to hurl at each other, and said this is how there came to be so many boulders strewn around the mountains. And thank you, I can't pronounce your name, starts with an E, Arindlia, but thank you for sending that. But it's always, whether you're dealing with the Toltecs, you have these huge boulders, maybe they're just such big giants they decided they got bored with eating people and wanted to play marbles. Well, they happen to weigh tons. But the point being is this, that everything now is going to be revealed. And like I said earlier, they'll try and contain it. It's beyond the point of containing, because when God gives his decree from heaven, let the truth be known. Doesn't matter who does what, doesn't matter who tries to cover it up. It will come forth. And I was literally in a place, I'm just going to whet the appetite of people. The people that come to Branson will see this. And I'm not going to show it anyplace else. I won't put it on my website. People will see an area that the Egyptian longboats actually sailed into this part of the Grand Canyon and the surrounding area thousands of years before the Anasazi were cannibalized. And we're talking about the same thing that Cliff Mahudi talked to us about in the drilling. And Tom, when that drilling took place, I was called after Coast to Coast and told that they carried the giants giant mummies out, and they took them to Area 51. Anybody want to bet there was extractable DNA from those?
Well, in following up with part of what Steve was saying, and Steve, as you know, when I saw the last documentary that you produced, I said at the time, that's the standard, that's the gold standard by which all other Christian documentary films are made. And I had never said that about your any of your other productions. I never said it about anybody else's documentary filmmaking, but it, in every way, it was the best Christian documentary film I had ever seen, from scripting to content, to the music playing in the background, to the timing between scene changes. I mean, everything about this was a full-on best of Hollywood level production. But I can now say, and I've only seen little parts of this, the new documentary, well, of course, being part of the research and being able to be, in the Four Corners area, spending weeks of time with you behind the scenes, where we went, what we filmed, what we were told, and being able to film some of the evidence, locations, and things like that you're going to reveal in your documentary film. I'm kind of dancing around some of the subject matter here, but I can now say that this is going to become the new standard. Well, at least that's what you and Tim are telling me, and I believe that it is groundbreaking information. It's going to demand the history of America be rewritten. That's not, that's a statement that people have used in the past. This time it's real. It really is honestly going to demand that a great portion of America's history has to be rewritten. Now, Steve, at the September conference, so again, people should realize there's the book, Unearthing the Lost World of the Cloud Eaters. There's the companion documentary film that you're producing, which is probably going to be 1.5 to 2 hours long at least.
2 hours.
2 hours long that you're producing, but because there is so much information here, you also decided that you would have a conference. It's going to be in Branson. Why don't you tell people how they can register to be there, who the speakers are going to be, and what are people, like Anselm P. Rambla, whom I've never met, but I know he celebrated. What's he going to be revealing to audiences? I mean, I kind of know a little bit. It's stuff that's contained beneath a specific Catholic church by the Vatican. But why don't you tell people who Anselm is, what his credentials are, and who some of the other people are that are going to be at this conference, and how, if they want to come, how can they register?
Well, first of all, there's a specific web page that we'd like to send everybody to. It's called Gen6, GENSIX, conferences.plural.com, Gen6conferences.com. Tim, when he was in Peru, basically met and talked to Anselm P. Rambla, actually talked to him in Spain. He lives in Spain. And Anselm has been a world-class explorer all over the world. He was the guy that discovered the Chincana, the great underground tunnel system in which the Incas were able to evade, a lot of Incas were able to evade the conquistadors when Pizarro, some people pronounce it, basically ransacked Peru looking and going for all the gold. Anselm is, by the way, he looks like that commercial. What a great looking guy. He just looks the part. And he's going to be there, and he speaks Spanish, but he'll have an instant interpreter as he speaks. And he's going to reveal things, and I only know bits and pieces that no one in the world has ever seen or heard. He told Timothy, and by the way, he at this point, is one of the foremost archaeologists in the world, but he had the Vatican shut him down because of what he found. And it's the same thing, ladies and gentlemen, that Tom is talking about in us on the Native American Sacred Site report that was done by the University of Arizona for the Defense Department. The thing that's important is that he has chosen, until this time, he said this to Tim, obviously in Spanish on the phone, and Tim, speak Spanish, that he knew there would come a time when he must release all the decades of information that he never believed would be released until that time. And he's basically saying, this is time. Now, I think that's fascinating because he's coming at it from a non-Christian perspective. He's coming at it from a classic archaeologist. He's coming from knowing that the official denials by the Catholic Church and the government, again, the same shadow government that shut us down with the person in Sand Canyon shut him down and shut him off. But praise God, Tom, we get the ability to have one of the great, I'm talking about Thor Heyerdahl kind of guy. I'm talking about guys who are in the Explorers Club, Percy Fawcett, who found the lost city of Z, or was looking for it before he was murdered, and 125 people went looking for him, and he was murdered they were murdered by the cannibals. But I would say this, here's what's going to be different. First of all, Timothy Alberino, L.A. Marzulli, and Anselm P. Rambla all center in South America. Now, it's called the Navel of Civilization. Derek Gilbert's going to be the first speaker because he has done a masterful job in his book Inception.
Yeah.
He was kind enough to send me the PDF. Dr. Michael Lake on the Shinar Directive, and I'm going to be one of the last speakers. You're going to be speaking Friday night, and you're going to be speaking on your findings, and I'm going to be basically the guy who speaks the last night on what it all leads to. But this is not a statement of, this is not, quote, bragging rights. For the first time in history, and I'm the one that wrote this, so I guess I can read what I wrote, the most cutting-edge and up-to-date researchers and authors concerning giants, fallen angels, ancient civilizations, and now the unfolding genetic war between men and beasts will be gathered together for the True Legends Conference in Branson, Missouri. Now, it's September 15th through the 17th, and Pastor David Langford will be there. And David I brought him on talk radio with me, I think 23 years ago. And David knows what's going on. He's going to be speaking to encourage the people of God. And last time he was in, both Texas and in Bozeman at the Whitestone Conference, there was a powerful move of God. We're going to lay it out for people, and then God's going to give his people. This we know in our spirits, and Pastor Langford has got a remarkable relationship with the Lord through prayer and fasting. Dr. Michael Lake, obviously, and I won't call you Pastor Tom Horn because that's not your place right now. You have been. But the point is I think it's interesting. It's the old and new crowd coming on the scene to basically teach people what God has independently taught us all these years. And through all these books we've written, all the interviews we've done, and what I want to share with people is, and I'm still working on the exact way, we're going to have a giant screen about, 12 feet by 40 feet or something like that. You've seen them, the great big screens. And those things are astonishing because we're going to present filmic evidence that we're not going to release anyplace. We're going to show it on purpose to the people that have come, who have prayed for us, who have supported us. And there's going to be some mind-blowing stuff. And again, with what has been taking place with the web bots, and ladies and gentlemen, I want to share this with you. Gordon McDonald, as Tom shared, he's the guy that's running this, doing a marvelous job. But he tells me that because there's other things going on in Branson, Missouri, there's only so many rooms there. So go to gen6conferences.com. And what I'm trying to do is have the people that are speaking give at least 30 minutes for questions. They will be pre-submitted and read out loud. That saves all the hemming and hawing. Since I'm not the most patient guy in the world, and you've done more, conferences than I have, that's basically patience and me don't go in the, but the hemming and hawing, and they really want to ask. I don't mean that. I want people to be able to address Thomas Horn when you are speaking about what you're speaking. When Anselm will have an interpreter, you can ask him anything you want. So I hate not, people leaving a conference. Now, obviously, there's a time limit on this stuff because it starts on a Friday morning, and I think we have 4 speakers a day or 3 speakers a day. We'll settle that, but we're leaving a half an hour to 45 minutes for people to ask questions. The questions will be pre-submitted. But again, the idea is this. the exploration, investigation, and education of the realities of the world before the flood of Noah and the tremendous, if you will, signs and portents they bode for the days we now live in. So I think it will be a mind-blowing. And Timothy Alvarino will be there, and I can tell you this, I'm trying to get Tim. Tim, you need to know people. Let me share this with you. I can't give the details because I'm not sworn to secrecy, but I'm not at liberty to tell this. The most powerful and most well-funded documentary companies in the world are partaking on two of the most famous expeditions that have failed. And they're calling, Gen 6. And you know what they wanted me to do? Not talk about Jesus so much, okay? And that's really true. But, the interesting thing is, in one location, you're going to love this, Tom, they volunteered the information, blonde-haired, blue-eyed giants that are cannibals in one part of the country. And this is on the Brazil border. And actually, if you've ever read The Lost City of Z, or there's a movie now, isn't it interesting? Amazon, Jeff Bezos is within $5 billion being the richest man in the world. And the very first movie he produces is the Amazon, with the Amazon River and the whole story of Percy Fawcett. The Lost City of Z. I think there is so much going on. Then the other expedition is to another part of the world, and we're one of the greatest underground cities in the history of the world. And we're talking stuff that's literally miles and miles and miles. Is in the former Eastern Bloc nations of Romania and Bulgaria. So, and ladies and gentlemen, these things cost a lot of money. We roll the profits in, and Tom, you've seen the quality of stuff we bring in, the cameramen, the soundmen, the post-production. For instance, the soundtrack, I'm telling you what, Tim has 18 tracks of music in this, and we have a guy named Carlos as a production assistant, who also speaks Spanish, and I've learned 3 words, I should learn more. But anyway, they're doing a marvelous job. We have a 6-time Grammy Award-winning sound guy, 6 times, and he happens to live in Bozeman. The astonishing thing is that some of the interviews, these people will be dead and not along, and what is perplexing to me is the timing. I'm saying, Lord, I'm hoping that when people see the quality of speakers that are going to be there, that they're going to start to open up. I'm talking about military. I'm talking about the intelligence agencies. And here's a word and I'm going to share this. I know from past, and by the way, you're all welcome. If you're with the NSA, CIA, NRO, ABC, DEF, GHI, I don't care. You're welcome. Because here's the word that the Lord gave me. And you can pray about it. And I believe it's for these people I just mentioned. The very entities that you believe you're going to control, when they come forth, they're going to come forth with an appetite, and you think you control them. They will not be under your control, and you guys will be on the menu. Now, I didn't sit up late one night because I'm up, late all nights, but that's something that the Lord dropped in my spirit. So I want you to ponder that. Everybody in those 3-letter, 4-letter agencies, ponder it. And you're all welcome. Just make sure you register soon, And by the way, Tom, we're seeing some very interesting feedback on Branson already. I get emails. Tim gets them. I assume you get them. I don't know. I haven't asked you about that. But what we're seeing is people really, really hungry. And Derek's book, and I think it's great. It's funny. Derek's interviewed me, 2 dozen times on Skywatch and their different updates. And now he has done a masterful job. And, it's called The Great Inception, Satan's Psyops from Eden to Armageddon. And I think his title is absolutely so specific, so concise, and so defined. Dr. Michael Lake will be talking about the Shinar from the Plains of Shinar directive. LA is going to be talking about all of his ongoing stuff in South America and his Watcher series. Timothy will be talking about whatever he wants to talk about that's current. And, we're going to be talking with I would say this, the foremost explorer in the world when it comes to the underground city. So we want people to come. We want you to register. And I think Gordon said there's a limit, that we can't have as many people as the thing will seat. So please, ladies and gentlemen, go to gen6conferences.com. I'm excited about this. And you know this, Tom, you've tried to get me to speak at conferences for what? I don't know, since we've known each other.
Yeah, and how in the world does that work, that you've turned me down on all of my conferences, but then you head-tripped me saying that I owe you, that I have to speak at your conference, right?
Well, yeah, but you had made me a commitment at your breakfast table, and I will say this, yes, and you agreed to do it, so we're blessed. And ladies and gentlemen, I know that Tom is, being gracious to come here, but again, it's, now looking back at what we've done together, I think you can see where your presence is required. And I will say this, the Lord hath need of thee.
Well, also, by that time, the time of the conference, I'm thinking that we will have met, hopefully, with the Smithsonian curators. So we'll have brand new information. And I've invited Michael Herring and his wife to be there. We'll be revealing the most up-to-date, groundbreaking discoveries. It's going to be visualized. In other words, people will see the images, the maps, all of it, all the pictures of what we discovered is going to be displayed. And then, of course, if people have the book, Unearthing the Lost World of the Cloud Eaters, and the documentary film, we're going to be there. If they, there's going to be a meet and greet. I don't know how how do they register to do the meet and greet, to be able to meet with us. We can sign the stuff, but it's not just about getting our autographs. I'm certainly not, I don't consider myself to be somebody who you need my autograph, but we're going to do that, but we're going to fellowship with people. How do they do the meet and greet?
I don't know that yet. It'll go up on the site. First of all, we got to decide how many people are coming, okay? And I'm leaving that stuff in Gordon's hands, And again, there are people that are special. When I say special to the ministry, there are a lot of people that have prayed, and I'm gonna be curious to see how many people have been listening to you and I. How long have we been on talk radio together? Do you remember?
I don't know, a couple of decades. Well, I know that you and I were doing radio back when it was shortwave, and it was pre-2000 because we were talking about Y2K and what some people believed was going to happen during Y2K. So,
yeah, that would have been 1995.
It's been at least 20 years.
Yep. Well, I'm troubled. One of my intercessors who was listening to the show in real time said she's been praying about this. And by the way, she prays and gets answers, and she takes it seriously. But she said, Lord, give me a word that relates to all this that's going to be taking place in the end days. And the word God gave her, this just comes in real time. That's what I love about doing this show with you, Doug and Joe and Tom, and we can respond in real time. And she said the word she got was gruesome. And then was interesting because I put it on my website years ago. My friend Romy Zarek, big-time intercessor, got a vision, and the Lord showed her black angels. I mean, they were dressed in black, coming down, singing beautiful music, and all the people were running after them, just like the Pied Piper, and they were leading them behind these ruins, and they were devouring them. Now, this was before the cannibal theme. I think she shared that with me close to 10 years ago. As a matter of fact, I'm going to twist her arm to have her resend it to me. But this theme, Tom, is this, that, again, by ingesting human DNA, the DNA is changed, and this is why it's critical for people to understand something. We don't know our family trees, and I don't mean swinging from them. We don't know what our ancestors did, but we know the promise of the Bible. If any man be in Christ Jesus, behold, he's a new creation. Old things have passed away. And if you want to get the basic primer on superpositioning quantum physics, all you got to know is when Jesus said we're seated in heavenly places, where I am, there you may be also. I'm in the Father, you're in me, and the whole thing in the book of John. The thing that's interesting is that That's superpositioning. So the spiritual realm that maybe even those in the time of the Gospels and Epistles, meaning at the time they were written, or the first century church, couldn't really understand quantum physics, but they believed the Lord. Some maybe did, but most didn't. And that's accounted to them for righteousness. So why I think this is so critical at this time is because you're going to have a xenogenetic world where every form of DNA is going to be inserted into the human genome. And I've said this before, and I stand on this. You've heard me say it probably a dozen times. The entire human genome project was not to find the human genome, but to find the inhuman genome. The entire point of taking DNA swabs and all these ancestry this and that, those go into a data bank. Just like everything you think, do, and say or typed on your computer today is memorialized in some bloody, and I mean bloody, soon-to-be bloody data bank someplace, so is DNA. The most precious commodity in the world is information now. And those who are seeking information and want to control the information also want to control the xenogenetic structure. I've got to share this. The book that I think is so critical for people to acquire, not because I wrote it, not because I researched it, but it's Xenogenesis. It's on my website. It's critical, ladies and gentlemen. It's absolutely critical, because what Tom and I wrote together in Unearthing the Cloud Eaters, the whole issue of that is basically based on the history of the world, the creation of the world, the judgment of the pre-world, and all that has to, that it contains, unearthing the lost world of the Cloud Eaters. And here's what's on: compelling evidence of the incursion of giants, their extraordinary technology, and imminent return. We could lay out every single thing point by point, but you've got to study these things. You've got to pray about them. You've got to see if these things be true.
Hey, Steve, I'm glad you brought up this whole point about xenogenesis, because I want to say something about your book, and also why you and I were just listed by the University of London as the leaders of the resistance, right? I'll say something about that in a moment. I want to just quickly add that at the conference, Anselm, as I understand it, he's going to be bringing the decades of information, some of which has been censored by the Vatican, regarding what he actually already discovered, buried beneath an ancient Catholic church. So he's going to be bringing some of that information, also new discoveries, that is going to literally be revealed for the first time at that conference. Well, you and I are also going to be doing that. And so this is going to be a conference unlike anything else. I joked with you a moment ago, but the reason I agreed to participate in all of this, the book, the documentary film, the conference, is because I was shocked by what we found. I was shocked by what we uncovered. It is going to demand the history of the Americas be rewritten. I'm excited about us making this information available to the world. And again, I'm going to repeat that if a person pre-orders Unearthing the Lost World of the Cloud Eaters, or the Cloud Eaters mega offer, at skywatchtv.com, go over there. You can watch the trailer. Right below the trailer at skywatchtv.com, right on the front page, you'll see this little ad. You can click on it. It'll take you into the store. And you can pre-order the new book, Unearthing the Lost World of the Cloud Eaters, the new documentary film. And you get both of those at a discounted price, but then free, you get two other books. I'm really excited. I bought a trainload of really high-quality books that are also associated with, aspects of our research that we're going to be giving away free, plus this 24-hour, never released before, new audio series called Shadow Hand, 24 hours of me and Steve talking about everything in the world. You're going to get that free, too. But for Hagmann listeners only, this is not advertised anywhere in the world. If you order this, if you make this pre-order, when you check out, either you'll see a place where you can order, enter a promo code. But if you don't see that, just put it in the comment section. Just type in Hagmann-Enoch, and if you do that, They're also going to include in your shipment the brand new hardback collector's edition of the ancient book of Enoch, which has the first ever narrative about how these giant cloud eaters arrived on Earth. Anyway, it's over $200 worth of stuff, and as Hagman listeners, we do that because we appreciate the Hagmans and we appreciate the audience that listens to them. Now, Steve, back to your xenogenesis stuff. You know, something, and I know we only got about 30 minutes now. One of the other things that we should maybe quickly discuss is the science of genetic manipulation and engineering, because this was used by the ancient Watchers.
Yes, sir.
The Watchers were really genetic scientists. That's what they were. That's what they did. Every record talks about them using the DNA of humans and animals to create these exotic bodies. Well, listen, that's exactly what modern geneticists are doing today in the creation of chimeras and other exotic body forms, CRISPR-Cas9 technology, gene editing. This is exactly what we are doing today. And so the question is this: if indeed the activities of the Watchers was the use of biotechnology, they wouldn't have used that term. We use it today. But if that's what they were doing to produce these exotic bodies that have the, well, first of all, they had the ability to become a fit extension for incarnation by supernaturalism, but they also had this strange ability to reincarnate after physical death. Would the method of the returning from the grave in the end times, Jesus says, Matthew 24:37, as it was in the days of Noah, is the method for their returning in these end times a repeat of that kind of science? Now, I believe that could be the case. The Bible actually provides a record of that occurring, and we don't have time to go into this because we've talked about it before. And when people get the free 24-hour Shadow Hand collection, there's a whole section, 5 hours long in there by me and you, in which we describe how the story of Nimrod, where Nimrod began to be a Gibborim, a giant, as it says in the Septuagint, exactly how that happened, how his genetics were modified. By the way, did Nimrod practice ritual cannibalism? Is that how his genetics were changed? It's kind of a secret. We don't really know. We just know that in the Hebrew Old Testament, it says his genetic makeup was changed, and he suddenly began to become an offspring of the Watchers. Very strange, right? All right, let's fast forward to modern days. Are scientists conducting the same thing today? Is this connected to Steve Quayle's book, Xenogenesis? A professor, S. Jonathan O'Donnell, he's a teaching fellow at the University of London. He very recently wrote a thesis titled Secularizing Demons, Fundamentalist Navigations in Religion and Secularity, in which he names me specifically, Tom Horn, redundantly in this article, as the leader of a growing transhumanist resistance group that he calls the Milieu. The Milieu, I think that's a French word, right? I looked it up. It simply means like a group of people. But he describes a particular brand of mostly evangelical believers and bioconservatives that he views as potentially dangerous anti-transhumanist apocalypticists that he warns could antagonize broad cultural tensions.
In other words, we're going to swallow their BS and become just like them. And by the way, I think it's great. We are the transhumanist resistance. I love it, Tom. I do.
Well, yeah, but this is full on university. Well, first of all, he sees me and you both as the leaders. He names you. He names you by name. He refers to your book, Xenogenesis. That's in the endnote of his thesis. That's why I brought this up. He sees you as the sergeant of arms, and I don't know what title he really means by me. He continues to refer to Horn's Milieu. But the point is, the thesis was selected and published in the prestigious quarterly peer-reviewed academic journal of Religion and Science. which is itself sponsored by the Center for Advanced Study in Religion and Science. Now, why is that important? Because these are the academic institutions that guide the development of curriculum, study programs, academic literature that's meant to influence religious and science leaders regarding convictions by which people make their fundamental decisions. In other words, here's what their website says. It says they do this thereby to revitalize and universalize the long-evolving wisdom and power inherent in the religious dimension of culture, to sponsor and conduct meetings, conferences, seminars, and lecture programs to communicate the results of the Center for Advanced Study in Religion and Science activities through scholarly and popular journals, books, works of creative artists and mass media, and to publish scholarly journals. In other words, what they're saying is
we're the scholars, meaning those guys, and we're just gnats in their buzzing around their heads.
Well,
that's my.
It's what they hope. What they hope is to influence and to guide through this slow progression and indoctrination the belief systems of religious people. So the bottom line is so that they can eventually reject, so that religious persons, Christians, will eventually reject conservatives, Bible believers like me and you, Steve, and Doug and Joe, and to convince them to accept a transhumanist agenda that's going to bring back the days of Noah, the lies of the Nakash, that men can be as gods, the lies of the cloud eaters, that the cloud eaters are our friends if we will only let them be. Now, I know I got to hurry, but because ancient transhumanism is absolutely related to the original sins of the Watchers, I believe, who saw that modifying humanity as a method of leaving their fixed habitation, as Peter and Jude discuss in the New Testament, quoting from the book of Enoch, I also see that this modern transhumanist milieu, you, me, the other people they name, which I'll tell you in a moment before we run out of time. This is fulfilling the prophecy of Jesus. Steve, earlier you quoted some of the resources that said at the end of time, a body of men will be raised up. And
amongst much clamor.
Yeah. The scientist, what was his name that said that?
Sir Isaac Newton.
Yeah, Sir Isaac Newton.
By the way, he was from London. He was from London too. Maybe he's answering that guy in a prophetic way.
Yeah. Well, in any case, they refer to our demonology. He's a University of London professor. He describes our demonology. And let me make a couple of fast quotes here about what he says about us. And if somebody wants this document, it's 23, 24, 28, whatever pages it is. It's been published in academic literature over the last couple of months, naming me, Steve Quayle, and some other people as the leaders of the resistance, right? But here's what he says. He says, I'm quoting now, the individuals in this group are not formally affiliated, but rather coalesce around evangelical survivalist Thomas Horn. I didn't know I was a survivalist, but okay. Their primary hubs at present are Skywatch TV, coordinated by Derek Gilbert. And by the way, Derek Gilbert is also speaking at the conference coming up in September. The group's print works are mostly published through Horn's publishing house Defender. Let me jump forward in this, because he just goes on and on. Horn's been featured heavily on the popular right-wing conspiracist website WorldNet Daily. I don't think Joseph Ferrer would like, that, whatever, the way he's defined in this article. Close ties to other parts of the Christian right through his ally with Chuck Missler, serving as faculty at Missler's Koinonia Institute. Both Missler and Horn, the other members of the milieu, are part of the broader current of the third wave spiritual warfare, a neo-charismatic paradigm with dominionist influence. And it's interesting because you and I have been very public about rejecting the dominionist worldview. But anyway, dominionist influences that emerged in the 1980s become influential across the spectrum of conservative evangelicalism in the United States, drawing on the biblical image Okay, so here's where it starts getting interesting. Drawing on the biblical image of the holy warrior, this paradigm, me and you, Steve, construct a worldview in which the spiritual, that is the heavenly, and material, that is the earthly world, act as intertwined battlefields in a cosmic struggle for the human soul, one waged against Satan, who has amassed an army of evil spirits that he is using to attack and demonize humans in an effort to win their souls for hell. He's doing all this sarcastically, but while projecting himself as a true Christian. He goes on, a clear example of this hermeneutic can be discerned in Horn's discussion of the causes and ends of radical enhancement, heaven and hell scenarios of human enhancement, drawing on Joel Gorou's Radical Evolution and Francis Fukuyama's Our Post-Human Future. Let me jump forward here because I want to get to the part where he's quoting Steve Quayle. He goes on and on. He describes how our Melu ties all this to the narrative of the Tower of Babel in Genesis 11, in which a united human effort to build a tower to heaven brings divine judgment and forced dispersion of the nations. So he goes on, quote, for the Melu, the goal of Babel is human apotheosis. The act of building this blurs into the second quality, an act of becoming God, which is opposed to being. In other words, what he's saying here is Tom Horn and Steve Quayle are opposed to the idea of the angels who left their estate, their place of being where God put them.
Probably show up at his house, Tom.
Yeah, requote, both Babel and Watcher narratives can be constructed as modalities of the fall, lambasting New Age and neo-pagan notions of inner personal divinity as attempts to recreate Babel by uniting all peoples under one faith. Horn writes, pagans argue that a principle of inner divinity is older than Christianity, which is true. The gospel, according to such New Age concepts, a gospel of becoming God, is old as the fall of man. It began when the serpent said to the woman, you shall be as God, and it will zenith during the reign of the Antichrist God King. Anyway, he goes on, he talks about Sharon Gilbert, all this stuff. And people, if somebody wants this, I'll send it to them. It's a 9,000-word academic dissertation. I actually paid to get a copy that was published in the Journal of Religious and Science Journal. It's his treatise. He's working on his PhD, but he's also a professor at the University of London. But he says, Steve, that for demonologists like me and you, and Steve specifically, transhumanism is connected to an apocalyptic vision in which technoscience initiates the end times, and the worst aspects of a demonized humanity will be unleashed. Salvation will be lost to all but the remaining unenhanced survivors. He's saying this, by the way, based on your book, Genesis.
Good.
Immortality and transcendence, he says, again, talking about you, will be achieved by artifice alone, in which the perfecter perfects itself through the perfection that it wills itself to be, and the keystone of Babel is finally set in fulfillment of a promise offered by a serpent in a garden long ago. Creation becomes finally and forever an utter and irrevocable outlaw. Now, very quickly, I know we're going to run out of time. Here is an important end to his analysis and where he and religious transhumanists like him seek to stereotype and diminish and conquer and divide. Watch what he says here at the conclusion of this thesis, which was published in a peer-reviewed journal. The article here, and I'm quoting now, quote, this article mainly uses evangelical to refer to the subset of conservative evangelicals known as fundamentalists. While evangelicalism can broadly be categorized by its emphasis on conversion experience, biblical authority, the centrality of the crucifixion, and activist commitment to good work, fundamentalism emerges as one specific part of this paradigm. Now listen, indeed, many evangelicals would deny association with fundamentalist paradigms like Horn and Quayle's milieu, which Matthew Avery Sutton defines as radical apocalyptic evangelicalism. The relation between fundamentalism and evangelicalism is multifaceted. However, and complicated by the use of the terms to refer both to specific historical movements and broader ideologies. In the United States, the conscious rebranding of conservative fundamentalists as evangelicals in the 1940s also complicates differentiation in contemporary context, not least since it obscures, among others, listen to this, the evangelical left, by which he means pro-transhumanist believers that call themselves evangelicals. Continue quote, the group we've explored, Tom Horn, Steve Quayle, and their milieu, could be designated as evangelical fundamentalists, or neither. Its members self-identify as evangelicals or conservative Christians and arise from the conservative evangelical tradition that runs through Billy Graham, Jerry Falwell, and Pat Robertson. Let me stop here for a moment. Note, he picks the three evangelicals that he imagines has the most negative labels historically, to try to lump me and you in with them. Me and you've never been involved with any of the above, but he tries to lump it all together. Let me continue this short quote, and then I'll quit. Their emphasis, back to Tom Horn, Steve Quayle, their emphasis on spiritual warfare, however, derives from Pentecostalism, specifically from the neo-charismatic third wave of the 1980s. Furthermore, despite claims to ideological purity and the primacy of biblical authority, these members draw heavily from pagan mythologies. Let me end quote here for a moment. He doesn't take time to elaborate. He just gives this broad mischaracterization that we're basing all this on pagan mythologies. Continue quote, Illuminous conspiracies and ufology and ancient alien hypothesis, and then in parentheses he says this, Horn, Putnam, and Quayle. This group is thus difficult to classify, and this article uses evangelical mainly as a way of locating in the United States cultural context with which it is most consciously aligned, end quote. And then he mentions the members of the milieu. He talks about, Steve, the church that you and I are pastoring, so we might as well mention who he mentions here. Here's the leaders of the milieu. Thomas and Nita Horn. Poor Nita, little pony girl, right, using therapy ponies, but all of a sudden she's part of the milieu. Steve Quayle, Chuck Misler, Michael Bennett, Gary Stearman, Sharon and Derek Gilbert, Douglas Hamp, Chris Putnam, who of course is now deceased, Michael Lake, John McTurnan. Michael Lake, by the way, is also speaking at the conference. John McTurnan, Noah Hutchings, who's also now deceased, Donna Howell, really? Give me a break. Donna Howell, Larry Spargimino of Southwest Radio Church, Douglas Krieger, Douglas Woodward, Paul McGuire, Fred DeRuvo, which I personally haven't heard from in a decade, Carl Tykrop, Gary Bates, Russ Dizdar, Michael Hoggard, Terry James, Terry Cook, and Frederick Meekins, among others. So now you know who makes up the mysterious conspirators, the milieu, the resistance organization under Tom Horn and Steve Quayle that are evidently the enemies of the transhumanist revolution, and I think the rebirth of the Watchers technology that seeks to bring back the days of Noah.
Well, I feel that he's done a really good case in spelling it out. I pray that the Lord takes him by his own words. We may have a milieu, that just means the family or the cadre of people, but he's got the meow, 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 and he may have a PhD piled higher and deeper. But I'll tell you what, he needs to cut through the BS, the Bravo Sierra. He needs to quit swallowing that which came off the fan. I'm not name-calling, but what I'm saying is this. Ladies and gentlemen, what you're going to see, and I think, Tom, no offense, he just made our case. People who stick to the Word of God, people who acknowledge Jesus as Lord and Savior. This is a classic hit piece of identify, vilify, nullify, destroy. Okay, I want to say that again. Identify, vilify, nullify, and destroy. It doesn't matter that some of the things he says, hey, I could could absolutely say, you know what, I agree with you, but since when does horse manure, and I'd like to use it in more blunt than that, qualify as good scholarship? What he has is an opinionated piece. He has no arguments. What he's doing is he's going to the classic mode of attacking the messenger, but he can't even deal with, for instance, Bill Joyce, why the future doesn't need us anymore. And if you go on Drudge any day, and I'm just using that because it's the biggest website of this kind in the world, I mean, Ridley Scott, aliens exist and will come for us. The preoccupation with aliens is the same thing that the Vatican, what you and Chris wrote about. So while he can, take us on as what is it again he calls us? I love it. I want someone to make a T-shirt. No. The transhumanist resistance?
Yeah, I mean he refers to us as the resistance. And again, people that that would like a copy, I had to buy it. It was published in the peer-reviewed academic journal of Religion and Science.
Coming from London,
he is a professor that teaches at the University of London. And as a matter of fact, I emailed him. I tried to get in contact with him. So far, he's not returned my email. Hopefully, he or somebody that...
Meow, meow, meow. Those are my sound effects.
Yeah. Thanks for the sound effects. But yeah, he has not responded. If he does, then I'll be honest to report whatever it is that he wants to say. There's people that are not in that end list at the end of his article that he also mentions. Rabbi Jonathan Cahn. He tried to take everybody who is maybe a leading voice right now in the prophecy circle. The people that are talking about world events and trying to put them into perspective, and tried to castigate them in whatever way that he could. And of course, the Center for Advanced Study in Religion and Science, that's like a mother organization over the Journal of Religion and Science, and they're very associated with the University of London. And the research that I did, I found out that this is like the number one. It's the number one organization in the world with the largest reach. So these people have full-on decided that they're going to take me and you to task, Steve, and they're going to do the best they can to try to stereotype us as on the fringe and to whatever, to try to get people not to listen to us or to perceive us as too much on the fringe, too radicalized, whatever the milieu. But the point is, I wear it as a badge of honor. The minute that I saw this was published, I was like, wow, thank you very much. Thank you for identifying us as the biggest problem that you have on planet Earth to stop the spread of Christian transhumanism. I appreciate it. It's a great deal. I love you. Thank you.
Me too. Here's the ultimate point that I think if we can make this point tonight and people pray about it, take it to the Lord. The one thing that Satan hates, the one thing the fallen angels hate, is the fact that we're creating the image and likeness of the living God, and they're not. They have tried to destroy that image. Everything that God created and he saw that it was good in the book of Genesis has been genetically or modified from the weather to everything that God created was good for our benefit. Every blessing he's given. This guy, this University of London professor, again, I would say this, you need to go down to the city of London, Mr. whatever your name is, and go talk to the boys that bring out the giants, Gog and Magog. And sir, while you're at it, you need to learn the legends of the British Isles, and you need to go look up Boudica, and you need to deal with all of your history. You need to go and look at the giant chalk figures. You need to go and look at the evidence beyond your arrogance and beyond your implied pseudo-intelligence. By the way, if there's an artist out there, I'm going to make an offer, okay? If there's an artist, and you're a skilled artist, some of you who have ever done graphic novels, if you want to come up with a really cool design for the the transhumanist resistance or takeoffs of it, I'll give you $500, and I mean that, because I would like them. What we'll do is we'll give it to Doug and I'll pay for the design, Doug, and then people can have T-shirts. I'll wear it. I am the resistance to transhumanism. And by the way,
I love it, man. I love it. I love
serious.
that we have just been named the resistance.
Yeah, so here's the thing. When I started writing about, and look, I'm only saying this because it's the middle of Drudge Tonight, Rise of the Sex Machines. I remember talking about that in Genetic Armageddon 15 years ago, $15,000 robot companion. What they're doing is the very thing I quote all the time, except the days be short and there be no flesh left alive. They are absolutely emasculating the American male. They're providing him with the, robotic release he needs. Same thing for women, and everything is dehumanizing. So that guy can basically choke on his own vomit. That is my opinion, and does, because all he's doing is regurgitating, I would say, an inherent arrogance that he knows better than us, and that, the thing is, Tom, you wrote Blood on the Altar. Ladies and gentlemen, if there was ever a prophetic book written that needs to be gotten from all of you, you need to get it from Skywatch. Is it on your shopping cart?
Yeah, I mean it is, and it's been amazing because that book.
Blood on the Altar.
And we did do a Hagman show on it at the time, Blood on the Altar. But it is amazing how prophetic that book has been and how much is being fulfilled today.
We are living it, Tom.
I want to tell people we have barely. Honestly, we have not even scratched the surface of what's in Unearthing the Lost World of the Cloud Eaters book, in the upcoming documentary film. I mean, there's so much stuff. The macaw, the scarlet macaw, the birds that were brought from Mesoamerica, an influence of the Aztec and the Maya that came down through the Anasazi trade routes in the earliest part of American history. People birds were important, has to do with their association with being able to communicate with the unseen realm. The macaw, because they can talk, these are exotic birds that can speak, like parrots, right? They were perceived by these early cultures as being almost like what we would call a familiar, like the witches would use a black cat, a familiar, or they would transform into a black cat and provide this bridge between the other world. There's an entire section in our book that provides information around why they were using the birds, the macaw, and their feathers and their dance rituals, how they wound up here in the United States. They are what we today call the United States, early America. They tried to actually raise and breed them here, and it didn't work because they can't survive in the desert Midwest here. But they were doing this because they saw them as intermediaries between this reality and another reality. And this goes back to the book of Enoch and how it says they sinned against the animals. They began modifying the animals. Did they do something? Did they create animals that have the ability of language to communicate with another reality? It sounds strange, right? But the more and more
hey Tom, I can't resist. No, it doesn't sound strange because you just read to me a literal proof that dumbasses can speak.
Well, but also that animals can see into the spirit realm. This is a biblical precept.
Yes.
Balaam's donkey, right?
Yep,
a biblical
that's what I'm referring
precept
to.
that some animals can see into the spirit realm. Well, the pagans, though, they believed that the macaw and their ability to speak, and they were using languages to communicate with an unseen realm in a way that today nobody does. Animals that can repeat sounds, languages, they don't think nothing about it, right? But that was not true in the ancient world. We uncover stuff like that. We uncover references in Ezekiel 13 of the magic bed of Babylon and Og. Thus saith the Lord God, woe to the women that create the casetat, the magic bands. These were the copper armbands, Steve, that you were talking about earlier today, that can bind the giants or that can allow for the release of the giants up from the underworld. people don't know that this is actually it's in the Bible. It's in the book of Ezekiel. So we break all of that down. The hags, the ghosts, and the kivas in early American belief, the gateway to another dimension. Anyway, I know we're out of time. The whole point is we didn't even get started tonight on the level of information that is covered. The new giant study that uncovers that rare DNA changes that can affect human height, and that right now in the United States of America, talk about your book, Xenogenesis, right now in America, and this is the largest study of its kind to date, the International Genetic Investigation of Anthropomorphic Traits, or the acronym GIANT Consortium, has uncovered 83 new DNA changes that affect human height, and this is one of the largest studies in the United States of America. It involves roughly 250,000 people that are being studied for one explicit reason, and that is to locate what in the human genetic code leads to gigantism. Now, why in the world would they be all that concerned about finding this genetic code that leads to gigantism? Anyway, there's so much information. Get the book, get the DVD, make sure you register for the conference in Branson, Missouri. There's going to be probably 3,000 people there. You're going to be hearing a lot about this in mainstream media and news in the coming weeks. But nobody else has the Hagman special. Hagman-Enoch is the promo code. Do that at skywatchtv.com. And I look forward to meeting people, Steve, at our conference in September.
This is going to be great, guys.
Again,
it's going to be great.
Thank you, Doug.
Tom, I just want to say thank you so much. I want to remind people, Hagman Enoch, in the promo code or in the notes section. But go ahead, Steve. Go ahead and, Steve, close it out. Tom, thank you so much. Steve, thank you. Steve, close it out for us.
You're welcome.
Go ahead, Steve.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, you're seeing what we've been warning about for decades now, the vilification, the identification, the vilification, nullification, and ultimately the death of those who will not bow down to the image of the beast, whether it's robotic, whether it's a composite, whether it's a chimera. I would encourage you all, and because this is so prescient that people are now starting to identify, there is a resistance. Again, I want to make this clear. Please, if you're an artist, I'll give $500 to the winning artist that comes up with basically the transhumanist resistance, a logo, even a secondary statement. That Doug can get the T-shirts printed, and you'll be able to support Doug. And by the way, I just put, Doug, all my books, all of them, everything I've written with the exception of the new one, into the Steve Quayle Total Collection. There's a story today on, Drudge, that people are turning away from electronic books. I think that's a good thing. People never understood the whole point in going to electronic medium was to be able to control everything that was ever written. So, my special, I think, is $120 off. It's everything I've written, and I think it'll be a blessing to you in the years to come. Just go to stevequayle.com, and again, gen6conferences.com. Looking forward to meeting everybody. I think it's going to be a conference that basically is unparalleled, because unless you go to the conference, you're not going to see some of the stuff, because we're just not putting it out publicly.